We all set? Everybody's ringers off? Good morning, everyone. Hope you're able to enjoy things last evening. I thought it was a really great performance. That was a real roll of the dice for anybody who's running an organization to allow the Community Playhouse to write a play and then produce it for the first time, but I loved it. I thought it was just great. As many of you know, my name is Andrew Tabler. I'm the president and co-founder of the Drake, as we know now, the Drake Forum, the Drake Energy Security Forum, as we're fully known. And it's a pleasure for me to welcome you here today to Titusville, to this, in a way, holy ground, the birthplace of the modern energy industry on August 27th, 1859. There are a couple of firsts that we have here today. One is that this is the first time that I know of we've had a meeting like this convened out here with the replica here through the window. We were going to have you facing that direction, but there was too much of a risk with the sunlight. The rotation of the Earth at this point meant that your corneas could burn out while watching Mike Summers give a speech, and something tells me API wouldn't like that, or the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Or me. So we decided to go with this as a secondary model. We will be inverting during the day, and most of the deliberations will be out in front of there. But sometimes it's better safe than sorry. This is not the first time, this is not the last time we're going to be having this, because I think this really works. There are a couple of other firsts here too. This is the first time our proceedings are completely being live streamed, with the exception of last night's dinner, out to the world, and we'll be receiving questions from outside. Anybody who's watching now or wants to refer their friends on social media, they can find us on our YouTube channel at Forum Drake. You can also just go to the Drake Forum website, and there you can click on a link and it will take you directly to our live feed. I'd like to also thank a few of our partners here. Of course, we have different collaborators. We have the Oil Region Alliance in this area, as well as the Venango Area Chamber of Commerce. They've done a stellar job of supporting us. But I think we couldn't do this all, for sure, without Drake Well Museum and Park, and particularly Friends of Drake Well Charity, which we've been happy to work with over time. They've helped in a way, give birth to this organization, and they continue to be with us here today. So I'm very, very appreciative of all of their efforts. They didn't have to go with this wild idea, but they did, and I think now we can see the result. So in focusing here on the Commonwealth, I just wanted to turn things over briefly here to Michael Necht. He's the site administrator of Drake Well Museum and Park, for a few words before we start. Come on up, Michael.
Thank you, Andrew, and good morning. I'm not going to talk long. I've lost my voice in the last 24 hours, but on behalf of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, the Pennsylvania Historical Museum Commission, the Drake Well Museum and Park, and the Friends of Drake Well, I want to welcome you to this wonderful facility. It's always a pleasure to have you all here. It's hard to believe that this is year number 4 that we have done this with Andrew. And it's a great opportunity for many of you, maybe for the first time, to see where the birthplace of the oil industry began in 1859. Just a couple of housekeeping things. Restrooms are over here on my right. There's also restrooms back behind the multi-purpose room where you had breakfast. If there is an emergency, the door that you entered the museum today is an emergency exit. There's also an exit through the MPR and through the back of the exhibit gallery. I was looking at the schedule that Andrew has put together, and it is an amazing schedule, an amazing group of panelists coming to talk to you today, and looking forward to that. Also looking forward to hearing Mike Summers in API. Without API, we would not be here. And so enjoy your time here, and if you have any questions, find me or one of the staff. We'd be happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Okay, a bit of a surprise. As you know, we're in the middle of a government shutdown, and in Washington we all know that, and we don't know when it's going to end. And we always, as a forum, ask both parties to provide, the whole way up the chain, not quite to the president, but pretty close, to provide or to send someone or to provide remarks, either live or recorded. We've done that time and time again. As our debate has evolved here, though, we've gotten away from pre-records. We made an exception today. We asked both senators from Pennsylvania, the senior Senator John Fetterman, as well as the junior Senator Dave McCormick, to provide remarks, lives or videos. We were successful in that the junior Senator, Dave McCormick, decided to give us a video, which I'm going to play for you now. Mark, take it away.
Hi, this is Senator Dave McCormick. Last year, I spoke to you as a candidate about the vast energy resources that Pennsylvania is blessed with and how they can be utilized to create good-paying jobs, drive economic growth, protect our environment, and make America an energy-dominant nation. Today, I'm happy to report that while there's more work to be done, we're making progress. In July, I hosted the inaugural Pennsylvania Energy and Innovation Summit, which brought together President Trump, members of his cabinet, top executives in energy and artificial intelligence, leading global investors, key representatives in labor, trade, and government officials to announce $92 billion of investment in data centers, energy and power infrastructure, and workforce and AI training projects. These commitments will create tens of thousands of construction jobs and thousands of permanent jobs, signaling Pennsylvania's readiness to power the AI and energy revolutions, and further strengthening America's resilience and independence. Pennsylvania is the second largest energy producer in the nation. We have the fourth largest natural gas reserves in the world, elite research institutions, a large skilled workforce, and proximity to water and major population centers. But as I said at the summit, we are closer to the beginning than the end of this energy and AI revolution. I'm committed to working with the Trump administration and my colleagues on the Energy Committee to enact meaningful permitting reform and get these projects off the ground and completed in an efficient manner. Pennsylvania has the ability to lead the way in helping us win the AI race against China, unleash American energy dominance, and protect the environment. And all of you in Titusville today will play a key role in making that a reality. Thank you.
Great, fantastic. So we're kind of rapidly going through we're running a little bit late, so I'm going to get things going with the keynote. And so just to talk to you a little bit about API's relationship with this site, back in 1934 for the Diamond Jubilee, as it was known, 75th anniversary of oil, API worked with the local chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution and other individuals here who had an existing museum to make this modern site, purchasing this property, building the dike outside, and an earlier version of the museum, which is in back of me, and then handed it over to the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania's Historical Museum Commission. And then, of course, more things here were built over time. That then went on, and it developed here until 1963 when the modern museum was built. And then in 2009, I believe, was it 2009? Yes. The front glass here was added that brings the replica into this room. As far as I know, this room has never been used in this way for such a meeting, and we're hoping going forward, I mean, there should be committee meetings here by state and federal officials, in my opinion, but not only. We could have everything here. We could either debate oil and energy to having a celebration of those getting married or whatever it takes. Work with the folks at Drakewell, and I'm sure that you'll enjoy it. The last time that we had API up here in force, before Mike's visit, of course, we had Stephanie Wisman last year, who was up here. I'm sure many of you got a chance to meet her. But I think the full delegation was here in 1959 for the 100th anniversary of oil. And you will find that image over outside here, the Energy for America poster, which is every year. It's on your bags, your conference bags. It's printed out here. The Friends of Drakewell will be selling that at a little bit later here to their benefit. We provide it to them, and it allows them to generate a little bit of extra revenue. Please visit the gift shop outside. You will not regret it, especially if you're an energy geek like myself, and I'm sure many of you are. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our keynote speaker, Mike Summers, President and CEO of the American Petroleum Institute. Since his appointment in July 2018 as the 15th president, right, of API, he has overseen the strategic realignment of API's priorities and advocacy efforts. Among other initiatives, he led the organization through an unprecedented period in global energy markets, effectively positioning the industry through political transitions in Washington and in state capitals across the country, increased utilization and visibility of API standards and safety programs, and led the adoption of the industry's solutions-oriented effort to address the risks of climate change. Of course, he also spent a long time on Capitol Hill. You can read about his bio online, as well as a stint in the White House. And having done that myself, he seems to come out of it better, not worse. And it's very, very hard work. We're very, very happy that he's here with us today. And I'm very, very excited about his speech today, which is entitled From the First Well to the Next Chapter, Building America's Energy Future. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me welcome Mr. Mike Summers. You're welcome. Come on up.
Thank you, Andrew. What an honor to be here. As a student of history, I can't believe it took me 8 years as the CEO of API to get to this historic site. Andrew asked me to be here last year, and I wasn't able to get here, but I wanted to make sure that I got here this year, and I can assure you that this is not my last trip to Titusville. I don't know what happened between 1959 and 2025, but I can assure you that this relationship with API and Titusville and the historic Drake Well is not going to end today, and we're excited about the opportunity. So excited to continue the ability to partner with this historic site. So a couple of things at the top here. For those of you who haven't walked through the museum, I would really encourage you to do it during one of the breaks today. It is not what I expected. This is a fully modern museum. I'm sure it is great for school kids to walk through this museum and have the opportunity to really learn the history of the American oil and gas industry. As the president and CEO of the American Petroleum Institute, we've been part of that history for decades and decades. Started really in 1919 as an organization that needed to build standards for an oil industry that didn't have them at the time. This is our primary focus as an organization is as a standards association that started as a couple of standards for the pipeline community and has grown into 800 standards that the American Petroleum Institute maintains worldwide. We have offices in Beijing and Dubai and Rio that sell those standards and certifications into the international marketplace. So we're fully an international organization. As the industry has grown, the American Petroleum Institute has grown. But before I get to the true theme of my speech, I wanted to give you a little bit more history. One of the local natives here, of course, is Ida Tarbell. You can learn all about Ida in the museum behind me. Of course, Ida was the one who wrote the seminal book on the Standard Oil Company and led to its ultimate breakup in 1904. It was Ida Tarbell's work that led to the breakup of the Standard Oil Company. What you may not know about Ida is that she wasn't just a famous muckraker, as Teddy Roosevelt called her, but she also was a historian. She wrote a lot of different biographies, including one of Abraham Lincoln in 1924. So in 1924, she wrote a book called In Lincoln's Footsteps, where she traced the path of Abraham Lincoln from his boyhood in Kentucky and Indiana, and then 25 years in the state of Illinois. I happened to grow up in the state of Illinois, and I remember as a kid, there were signs all over central Illinois for what was called the Lincoln Heritage Trail. And this was a trail that actually traced Ida Tarbell's steps when she wrote that biography. So the history between my youth and someone who grew up in a state, the land of Lincoln, where we didn't get President's Day off, we got Lincoln's birthday off. And our 8th grade trip wasn't to Washington, D.C., it was to Springfield, Illinois. When I was a kid in 5th grade, I memorized the Gettysburg Address. That was an assignment at my local parochial elementary school. So Lincoln was inculcated in my life, my entire youth. And that Lincoln Heritage Trail, I remember going to Springfield and following the steps of Lincoln So I recently picked up a book that someone recommended to me. It's called The Land of Lincoln by an author by the name of Andrew Ferguson, written in the early 2000s. And I'd encourage you to pick it up. Similar to me, he grew up in the state of Illinois and was inculcated with this Lincoln legacy. But I come to the 5th chapter where it starts talking about that Lincoln Heritage Trail, and this is what I learned. Andrew Ferguson went and met with the old state historian in the state of Illinois, and he asked him, where did the Lincoln Heritage Trail come from? And he said, well, I didn't come up with it. In the early 1960s, the marketing guys from the American Petroleum Institute showed up. And they said, we want to create this trail because if we promote more tourism, we're going to have more people buying gasoline. So it wasn't just the Drake well that API came in and helped preserve, but it was also Lincoln's legacy. So here we are today at the historic Drake well, the incredible history that we have here with API participating in the restoration of this project in 1934, and the early 1960s, API retracing Lincoln's steps to here we are today in a time of historic international change, where we're dealing with historic energy transitions. And today, we're celebrating what it's going to take for the United States to go from the true energy superpower that we are to taking it to the next level of energy leadership. We know the position that we are in today, where we have rising energy demand. In fact, in the United States, we expect energy demand to go up by 40% just in the next 15 years. And the real question that I think policymakers, and we have some of them here today, are going to have to answer is, where is that energy going to come from? Because we know that demand is going to go up. And by the way, we knew it was going to go up even before the dawn of artificial intelligence and more data centers. We knew that. Policymakers knew that. Why? Because more people are going into the middle class. They're using more air conditioning. And yeah, they're plugging more things into the grid. And that means we're going to need more energy sources going forward. But primarily, we're going to need a lot more natural gas. And that's where Pennsylvania comes in. This was the state that led the energy revolution from the beginning. This was the place that started the oil revolution in 1859. And then that revolution has continued. You've led the way for decades and decades to build energy sources of the future. This was the state that pioneered the fracking revolution. This was the state that was at the forefront of the coal revolution, the nuclear revolution. And I know that that history is going to continue today. As Senator McCormick said, we have the 4th largest natural gas reserves in the world right here under our feet. And natural gas is going to play such a key role going forward. I was honored earlier this year to be back in the Commonwealth, where I had the opportunity to speak to Senator McCormick's AI and Energy Summit that he held at Carnegie Mellon University, where he brought together hyperscalers and energy producers and people that are going to require that energy going forward. And the whole conversation was, where is that energy going to come from? So that's what this energy revolution is all about, and why Pennsylvania is going to play a key role going forward. The world consumes 100 million barrels of oil every single day. Think about that for a minute. The world consumes 100 million barrels of oil every single day. And we've talked a lot about energy transitions, but we actually had an experiment in this just a few short years ago during the pandemic. So think about the position that we were in then, where everyone was staying home from school. No one was going to work in the Western world. Guess what the number was then? The world still consumed 90 million barrels of oil every single day. This energy transition is not going to be easy. And we know that oil and natural gas are going to play a key role for decades and decades to come. And what's great about where we stand today is the last big energy revolution started right here, 100 feet from us, right behind you, that historic Drake well, when an entrepreneur decided to take a risk. When everyone else doubted Colonel Drake persisted. And discovering oil on this historic site, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania became the world's energy leader. And you're poised to do it again. But what is going to be required to keep that energy revolution going forward? It started here, but how do we keep it going? That is the question that policymakers have to take today. And I think the answer is pretty simple. We have the resources in this country. We have them right here under our feet. But what is holding us back? What's holding us back is a government, both at the state and federal level, that is preventing us from getting these resources, extracting these resources. We have the most broken permitting process at the federal and state level that you can possibly imagine. Right now, it takes over a decade for many of these energy projects to actually take hold. We don't have a decade to wait. We know that this AI revolution is going on. We know that the world is going to require more energy. And again, that all comes back to that key question: where is it going to come from? And if we can't extract these resources, we are going to cede our place as the #1 energy producer in the world. So, my call today is that Republicans and Democrats come together and have this conversation about where we're going to get this energy and how we reform a permitting structure that is so broken. We've seen it time and time again. Pipelines canceled as a consequence of them no longer being economic because we can't get them built in a timely manner. It happens over and over and over again. Let me give you a key example. Just last year, it took an act of Congress to build a pipeline in this country. The Mountain Valley Pipeline had been held up for years and years and years. It was a pipeline that was supposed to cost $3 billion. At completion, it ended up costing $9 billion because it got held up by a federal permitting process and then activist litigants in state and federal courts. There is a historical example, however, of that happening before. The same thing happened in the late 1970s. In the state of Alaska. The Trans-Alaska Pipeline was being held up for environmental reasons. And it took an act of Congress to get that pipeline built. In the intervening time, that federal permitting process has just gotten worse and worse and worse. And if it weren't for Senator Joe Manchin, in the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, there still wouldn't be that Mountain Valley Pipeline, which ships natural gas from the state of Pennsylvania through West Virginia to output into the Gulf Coast. That pipeline still wouldn't be built if it weren't for that act of Congress. It shouldn't be that way, and it doesn't have to be that way. That pipeline right now is fully subscribed. We need another pipeline because the natural gas resources in this state are growing so much. But we're tapped out right now because there's no takeaway capacity left for the state of Pennsylvania. So this is becoming a jobs issue, it's becoming an economic issue, it's becoming a consumer issue. And I believe that ultimately it is about to become a political imperative because energy prices are going up. We're in this fascinating place right now where gasoline prices have been going down, but energy prices are going up 10, 20%, and they're only going to go up more if we can't build pipelines and transmission lines in this country again. And by the way, this isn't just something that the oil and gas industry needs. We know that other sources of energy need it too. And if we're going to power the future that we know that we need in this country and win the energy revolution, permitting reform is required. Andrew mentioned that we're currently in this terrible government shutdown. The political parties are at the farthest point away that they have almost ever been. But this is one area where I think our country can actually come together and get something done, because it is a political imperative. Because in that, what we call the energy trilemma of how do you provide energy that is affordable, reliable, and sustainable, it's affordability that almost always wins. And when American consumers stand up and see that their energy prices are going up 20% and their politicians aren't doing anything about it, they will vote, and they will make this a political imperative to get this done. API recently launched a campaign. We call it the America Builds, America Wins campaign, to provide the political space for lawmakers on both sides of the aisle to come together. And there are glimmers of hope. The United States Congress right now is working on a bill called the SPEED Act that is a bipartisan bill between Republicans and Democrats to fix this process. But that's not the only thing that has to be done. You talk to API member companies, our big companies that want to build these big energy projects. And what they tell me is that, yeah, the federal permitting process and the state permitting process takes too long. But we can get through it. What has to be solved is the endless litigation that occurs and the venue shopping that occurs. So even after you get a federal permit, it's almost impossible to get anything built in a timely and economic fashion. We can't wait. And it is time for Republicans and Democrats to come together to get this done. The energy revolution started right here in beautiful Titusville, Pennsylvania. And what you see here, the historic sites, of course, you can still smell the oil in the Drake well. It's still coming up, by the way. And I would encourage you to walk 100 feet away and see that incredible site. That energy revolution started right here. But it doesn't have to end here. The United States can continue to be the largest oil, gas, and by the way, renewable energy producer in the world and win the race for the future, because everything starts with energy. And we know that if America builds, America wins. With that, proud to be here in Titusville, Pennsylvania, and I'm happy to take any questions that you may have.
Hello? Oh. Does anyone have any questions? Sid, why am I not surprised?
First of all, thank you very much. I agree wholeheartedly with you and my support. It seems there's a bit of a conundrum now, if you will, in the sense that we would like to see a low price for gasoline and diesel and natural gas for electricity and home heating, cooking. So consumers want a low price, but the industry needs a price adequate to give them margins to support development and to keep finding 100 million barrels a day of new oil year after year, and to do research and to pay for environmental things that we all want to see kept. So how does one handle that conundrum? And certainly the president's faced with that right now, and I'm sure you're faced with that too. So what do you say about this conundrum on price?
Absolutely, and great question. This is what I'll say, first of all. This is an industry that, as you can tell from the museum behind me, we're very used to the booms and busts of the commodity cycle. Prices go up, prices go down. Our member companies at API, we invest over the long term to ensure that the American people have an appropriate price for what they pay every single day at the pump or for their energy. And I'll say that I went through a pretty historic bust during the COVID pandemic when oil prices actually went negative for a short while at negative $39 a barrel. We all should have bought then, by the way. So that was a period, of course a historic period, and as the museum gets updated, I'm sure that will be highlighted as well. But that was a period where the industry was not very well capitalized. and there had been a lot of capital that flowed into. We were not returning money to investors as the industry should have. And the industry, just like nobody else was prepared for a global pandemic, the industry wasn't prepared for a global pandemic. Now this industry is very well capitalized and is ready for what looks like another downturn in prices, mainly as a consequence of OPEC producing more barrels and putting them in the market. So the industry is resilient. The industry will continue to produce. What's amazing is we are now producing more oil in this country, more natural gas in this country than any country has in the history of humanity. But the real question is, are we going to be able to continue to explore and find new resources? Because if you listen to the scholars on this, the Permian Basin, which is the #1 producer in the United States right now, this is the area in Texas and New Mexico. If you listen to the scholars, they think that production is peaking or will peak in the Permian Basin sometime in the late 2020s. For what it's worth, I don't believe that. But that's what many of the scholars suggest. But if that is true, we need to be looking for other places to find these resources in the United States. So that's why increased leasing in the Gulf of America is very important, which President Trump has put back online. So there's a boom in the amount of exploration in the Gulf of America right now, and we expect that there are going to be 30 lease sales just in the next 10 years to produce more oil and natural gas from the Gulf of America. You're seeing people return to Alaska. That Trans-Alaska pipeline that I mentioned earlier is not operating at full capacity. We could be developing more in the state of Alaska and in many, many other places. But we have to be able to have access to these resources. So Gulf of America, more lease sales on federal lands, returning to Alaska, more development in the Gulf of America. That is what's going to provide the resources that we're going to require if we're going to continue to be the world energy superpower.
Great. Brenda.
Hi, good morning. Brenda Schaefer from the U.S. Naval Postgraduate School. So several times during your presentation you mentioned the phrase energy transition, but actually there's zero evidence that we're replacing fossil fuels with today's generation of renewable energy. And in fact, if you look at the latest report of the Energy Institute, one of the most reliable sources of energy data, they estimate today that fossil fuels supply 87% of global energy consumption, meaning from their estimate in 2023 was 81.6, so meaning an incredible increase due to their more sort of reliable assessments about the role of fossil fuels. Is there any reason we should continue sort of, in a sense, misleading our public about this idea that we're on the eve of a transition to today's generation of renewable energies, and also misleading investors about these trends?
Brenda, I completely agree. I think actually we are transitioning from the energy transition. Let's put this into perspective. That the last time a so-called energy transition occurred was the 1960s, when we started using more oil and gas than we did coal. So we were transitioning from coal to oil and natural gas about in the 1960s time period. In 2024, the world consumed more coal than it has in the history of humanity. In 2025, that number will be exceeded. We'll use more coal in the history of humanity than we have in all time. So energy transitions are very rarely energy transitions. What happens is the pie gets bigger. More people are consuming more energy. But we are going to need more energy to provide to the world. And that means we're going to have a lot more oil and natural gas, of course. We expect that by 2040, we're going to require more than 110 million barrels of oil every single day. We're going to need a heck of a lot more natural gas, because that's how most people are powering their homes right now. But in addition, we are going to need new energy sources as well. Although, I would argue that wind and solar are some of the oldest kinds of energy. The first solar cell was actually invented in the 1890s. Wind, of course, has been around for decades and decades. We had an energy transition, and it was from those sources of energy to oil and gas. But we're going to need a lot more energy on the grid, where that pie is only growing. And so, yeah, we're going to need oil, we're going to need natural gas, we're going to continue to need a lot of coal, but we're going to need wind and solar and geothermal, which we have out right in front of us. But also, we're going to need a lot more nuclear. And so advanced nuclear technology is going to be very important for our future as well.
Tatiana?
Thank you. I'm Tatiana Anderson. I've worked with Andrew in the Drake Forum for a few years now. Thank you for your comments. You talked about this issue being a bipartisan one. We have some pretty heavy hitters in this room from the world of research and development, think tanks, politicians themselves. What would you say to all of us in this room about what we can do personally to address the bipartisan issue, to bring people together, to really, I guess, do everything you're saying about creating an energy revolution that's actually moving forward?
So this is a great question. I do think that politicians, lawmakers, I spent 20 years in government service, they are moved when their constituents tell them to move, and not until then. We have a state senator, we have a representative here as well who represent this area, Lee and Scott. So pleased that they're here with us today. They can speak to this, that when their constituents call, when their constituents write, they move. And I'm telling you, we're at this cusp, that as prices continue to rise because of more demand on the grid, this is going to be a political imperative for lawmakers. It's not going to be enough to say that, we don't want to do that because it's fossil fuels, or we don't want to do that because it's wind and solar on the other side. We have to get back to a point where, I'll remind you that the fracking revolution occurred when Barack Obama was president of the United States. That this was at one point a bipartisan issue, more energy on the grid, and that's one of the ads that we're playing in Washington, D.C. right now, traces the history from Jimmy Carter to Ronald Reagan to George Bush to Barack Obama, and Bill Clinton in between, to now, where every politician talked about energy security and energy independence. This has historically been a bipartisan issue. So I'm hopeful that as it's everyone in this audience that has it in their power to do this, call your congressman, get involved. Go to API's website that is called permittingreformnow.org and join this revolution where we're actually going to be able to convince people that this is a political imperative to get it done. Because it doesn't just mean the country's economic future, but it means consumers' ability to continue to pay for these resources.
Hi, Michael Ratner with Congressional Research Service. My question kind of gets at what you're talking about, but from a little different perspective, in that how do you, or what are the effects on your job, API's job, but everything that you've been saying, when the pendulum of politics swings so widely from currently to Trump, if you're going backwards to Biden, to Trump, to Obama, how do companies, how does API reconcile those big swings in politics?
Michael, that's a great question, and let me do a call out for the Congressional Research Service. I mentioned I worked on Capitol Hill for decades, and the Congressional Research Service is such a resource for Congress in providing nonpartisan information. It's a national treasure. So, Michael, thank you for what you do. Darren Woods, right after the election, Darren is the CEO of ExxonMobil, made the point that this industry does not invest over 4-year cycles. We invest over the long term. So part of my job at API is to pendulum-proof the American oil and gas industry, no matter who the President of the United States is. So we work with both political parties. I had the opportunity to meet, almost on an annual basis with John Podesta, who spoke to this forum just last year. John Podesta was a voice of reason within the Biden administration. We have great working relationships, across the aisle, Republicans and Democrats who care about these issues. And the most important word in the American Petroleum Institute is institute. We are meant to be a research body, a provider of data to lawmakers and to others who seek to learn more about this incredible energy industry. So it is a challenge, because you're right. The pendulum does seem to be swinging wider and wider, and my challenge as the CEO of API is to not get hit by that pendulum every 4 years. I will say that the extreme swing from Biden to Trump has been something to behold. I mean, if you think about what we were going through with President Biden, where they were canceling lease sales in the Gulf of America, they were holding up leases on federal lands, they put in place the LNG pause for exporting liquefied natural gas. I don't think, because I think even Democratic politicians now confirm that they swung way too far towards that so-called energy transition. And now you even see people like the governor of California, Governor Newsom, who just signed into law a bill that will allow for more leases in Kern County, California, which is one of the most prolific oil fields in the world, that we're going to have more drilling in the state of California, because he recognizes that they've gone too far. So I think what you're probably seeing right now is that swing in the opposite direction, where President Trump is canceling wind projects and solar projects all over the country. I actually think, now that we've seen these two extremes, that there is room in the middle for us to develop this bipartisan approach to energy, because of energy demand going up and prices going up, and everyone recognizes that we have to get back to an all-of-the-above energy policy.
I have a follow-up. Thank you so much. I wanted to speak a little bit about kind of the regulatory certainty piece in the middle of those pendulum swings. I hear what you're saying about projects moving forward, and then I understand kind of on a long-term basis, right? Like, that's super important to have that clarity, right? So you can, as you're saying, build that infrastructure ahead of time, ahead of when you need it. But I wonder if you can kind of speak to I hear a lot from operators and industry about how difficult it is to make decisions in the interim, like on the regulatory side, with all the uncertainty around, as you say, the pendulum swing, what we're seeing from the administration on rollbacks, and akin to the kind of cancellations that you're talking about projects that, we need more energy, right? We need more transmission. So I guess in that space, like, do you see room for preserving the kind of consensus-based regulatory changes over the last 10, 15 years that have, in large part, I think, been adopted? I work on methane, and for that, many operators are investing billions of dollars to capture methane, bring it to market, and seeing environmental improvement. So I guess, do you have any comments on, like, at this moment in time, like, what your view about regulatory certainty is?
Yes.
Yes, thank you.
Elizabeth, you raise a great point, which is what has been truly historic about the last few decades is that energy production in the United States has gone up, but emissions have gone down. That's never happened before, and it is because of innovation and industry focus on cutting those emissions and environmental performance. API, for example, has a program called the Environmental Partnership, which is all about how you reduce methane emissions within our own operations. Not because of a government mandate, but because we recognize that there's a problem in methane emissions, and we have to address that problem. Regulatory certainty is a huge issue for us. I'll give you an example. So the Environmental Protection Agency just announced that they were going to get rid of the greenhouse gas reporting program, the so-called GHGRP. The Environmental Protection Agency does not currently have statutory authority to execute a GHGRP. And what they have done is they've drawn a firm line in the sand that EPA now, under the Trump administration, is saying that if we don't have statutory authority to do something, we're not going to do it. So my industry, the American oil and gas industry, wants to continue to report on emissions. We've been doing this for 15 years. We want to continue to be able to do it. But it looks like the GHGRP is going to go away. So right now, we're in a process of figuring out how are we going to replace our ability to report on emissions. So API is going to play a key role in that. We're already downloading all of that historical data, that is publicly available data, so that we can continue to report and compare it to historical data as well. We want to be able to continue to report and show the progress of the American oil and gas industry in reducing emissions over time. We also support the full federal regulation of methane. And at this point, anyway, in our negotiations with EPA, they plan to continue that program. We've suggested some tweaks on how they do it to allow for us to use more modern technology to report these methane emissions, but we want to continue to have that regulatory framework so that we're not dealing with 50 different states regulating methane emissions. So regulatory certainty is very important. And I'll tell you that if given a choice between a more stringent regulation that we have to deal with and giving us regulatory certainty over a 10-year, 20-year time horizon, we would take that more stringent regulatory system. And that is what we have advocated for. We want to continue to report. We know how important emissions reduction is for our social license to operate, but also for environmental performance. So no matter the administration, we're going to continue this work of the environmental partnership to reduce emissions within our own operations, not just at the wellhead, but in the transportation and also the refining of these important hydrocarbons. So we will do it if the federal government isn't going to do it, because it is that important for our license to operate going forward.
So we are behind schedule as usual here at the Drake Forum. Mike, your words were, I think, really captured the moment, particularly the need for bipartisan approach to the energy problems in front of us and the environment and so on. I've written hundreds of emails to people to get them to come up here in the woods and to be with us. And in the end, it's interesting the connections that actually get people up here. It wasn't an email to Mike that got him up here. Actually, my good friend, a classmate here from Oil City, Kayvon McNoon, and his family are friends with Mike and his family. And
our daughters were sorority sisters.
Yes, and Kayvon was my fraternity brother. And that's how small the world really is. And it's those personal connections that are very, very important, right? And I would say that to all the young people out here, that there are a couple of things that are very important in life. One is your personality, and the other one is the personality of your boss. And I think you know a little bit about that, Mike. So to make this appropriately personal, I have something for you to go back to Washington with that you're not going to be able to fit in your carry-on, but we'll get it back to you.
Oh, that's awesome.
So earlier this year, a local collector approached me about this. I was able to get this on the open market, and it's fully listed down below here, so nobody can ever forget it, whoever sees it. But this is a banner from the 1934 opening of Drake Well Museum here, which was shepherded by API. It was professionally framed by Victorian City Art and Frame in Franklin. And it reads that it's this banner that API spearheaded that effort to commemorate the birth of the modern energy industry in Pennsylvania on August 27th, 1859, presented with great appreciation to API President and CEO Mike Summers, October 2025. I'm so glad you started out this talk about how happy you are to be up here, how impressive the museum is. We don't want this to be your last visit. We'd love to have you up anytime you want to come up. But we're hoping that you can accept this small appreciation of our history to hang on your walls in Washington, D.C.
I can assure you this is going to have a prominent place in the API Washington office, so thank you so much.
You're welcome.
It's so cool.
We'll make sure we get it to you.
FedEx can transport.
Exactly. Yeah. Mike said maybe we could get FedEx to take it. Actually, it's going to be my car, but that's okay. You know, it burns gasoline for now. You know, who knows what's going to happen? Yeah, Andrew X, exactly. So I think with that, just one second. Yes, so now we're going to I know Mike has to take off and get back to the Pittsburgh airport, but what I'd like to do is move on to the next session, which we call the Energy Scene Setter, and we invite someone every year to come and deliver a little bit about where the world of energy is, statistically and otherwise, and where it might be going. And we're very, very happy this year to have Adam Szymanski with us. He's been here before, back in 2009, so not 1859, but 2009, right? And Adam is here with his entire body from his company, his organization. He's currently senior advisor to the board of CAPSARC, an energy-focused advisory think tank based in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia, where he previously served as president from 2018 to 2021. And the president of CAPSARC, Fahad Al-Ajlan, is here with us today, as well as his colleague Brian. Before that, he held the James Schlesinger Chair for Energy and Geopolitics at the Center for Strategic International Studies, where he was a non-resident expert. From 2012 to 2017, he was the administrator of the U.S. Energy Information Administration, the EIA, and prior to that, he served as Senior Director for Energy and Environment on the U.S. National Security Council. He's very, very deeply involved in the energy world. You can find lots about him online. I'm not going to take up any more time. I'm going to let Adam take the floor and give us his take on where energy is and where it might be going. Thank you very much. Come on up, Adam.
Okay, I don't need this. Thank you, Andrew, for the very kind introduction, and to Mike Somers, that's a tough act to follow. So CAPSARC, as I said, is a think tank and advisory group in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. And I was thinking about the history of the Drake well. Fahad and I were reading a panel at the transit building last night that said the daily production of the Drake well was a gallon per hour. So that's about 1 barrel every 2 days. And Fahad had a little difficult time understanding that because the Ghawar field in Saudi Arabia produces almost 4 million barrels a day. A little difference, and I think it shows you how the oil industry has changed over time. So, are there slides that you can bring up? So just click. Okay, so which one is it? I'm going for, there we go. All right. First, I thought I would give you, so which way do I have to point it? The forward button, the forward arrow, right? There we go. All right, so let's go back. A lot of people have 30 or 40 years of experience. I only have 10 years of experience, and if this clicker would work, 7 times. All right, so what are the 7 times of 10 years experience that I have? Mike talked about this earlier. So there's just a little bit of a delay. I grew up in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, which is about a 3-hour drive east of here. And I got my driver's license in 1963. And the first gallon of gasoline that I bought cost 30 cents. So that's a lot different. But you know, if you adjust for inflation between 1960s and now, it's about $3 a gallon, which is what we're currently paying. That's kind of a remarkable thing, too, when you think about it, that the price of gasoline hasn't really changed all that much. This was the period of disruptions, the embargo in 1973-74, the Iran-Iraq war in 1979-80, and oil in real terms got up to over $100 a barrel compared to today's prices. Then we had the diversification. So people started using lots of other fuels other than oil. And demand for oil began to go down. And during the 1980s, particularly after 1986, we had a real drop in the price of oil. That led us into what I call the period of the internet, 1990s. Oil wasn't doing much of anything. Energy was kind of static. And everybody was focused on the beginnings of the internet. Then in 2000s, we had a remarkable resurgence of growth in oil demand all around the world, particularly in China, where demand was growing by more than 1 million barrels a day in just one country, over the period 2004 to 2008. We then had the shale revolution that dominated the period from 2010 to 2020. We have the transition that we could say might have started in the 2020s. We'll see where we're going. It's kind of interesting. We're back to about $60 a barrel. Okay, so. And those are my 10 years worth of experiences 7 times, by the way. So why does it do this? I sometimes have a prop, but supply, if you look in an economics textbook, it'll give you supply and demand curves, and this is the price, and this is the quantity, and they talk about widgets, and widgets are always very elastic. A small change in price or quantity gives you, small changes. So quantity can shift around, and you just get small changes in prices is the way to think about it. For oil, the curves are a lot steeper. They look, instead of being flat like this, the curves are very steep. And what that says is for a small change in quantity, 1 million barrels a day change in demand or supply can make a huge difference in the price. And that's what has always led to the issues associated with gasoline that motivate the politicians to want to look at changes in legislation and regulation. So here's some supply chain interruptions that I just listed over the course of my career. I mentioned 73 and 74, oversupply in 1986, China demand growth, global recession in 2009, Hurricane Sandy in 2012. There was no gasoline available in New York and New Jersey, and there was a huge effort on the part of the governments to change that. Shale revolution in North Dakota and Texas, the Marcellus in Pennsylvania for natural gas. Everybody remembers COVID and the huge drop in demand. We had almost, I don't know, it was like a 10 million barrel a day drop in demand. And then the supply chain interruptions in the Ukraine in 2022, Russian oil. This one is interesting. The attack on Abcake and the elimination of 5-6 million barrels a day of crude from the market. You know how much oil changed? I don't know, maybe $1 a barrel. There were headlines that said oil was going to go to $200 a barrel, and it didn't. We'll come back to what the reasons were for that. In fact, let's talk about it right now. This is a paper that was done at CAPSARC, peer-reviewed, published in the Energy Journal. And what that peer-reviewed paper says is that the market management of OPEC has shaved the peaks and the valleys off of these wild variations that we get in the price of oil. So that OPEC's market management has actually had a positive effect on GDP, because economists will tell you that excess volatility is not good for the markets, that there are economic losses associated with excess volatility. And what OPEC has managed to do over a good portion of the period that we looked at CAPSARC back to 2001. So by shifting prices to be less volatile, OPEC has actually helped the global economy. Let me pause for just a second and say I'm citing CAPSARC research here, and I lived in Saudi Arabia for 5 years, but I'm speaking not on behalf of CAPSARC or Saudi Arabia. These are my opinions, but I strongly believe that OPEC gets a bad rap on market management techniques. And in fact, I think as we move out over the next year or so, that we're going to see OPEC continuing to play a positive role in doing that. So Mike talked about this. Let me just show you some data. This is from a while ago, but it's still true. Growth in places like India probably are going to begin to supplant the growth that we've seen over the past 20 years in China. Eurasia. So the world is going to need more energy and more oil. The OECD countries might not need as much energy per unit of GDP growth, but the overall trend globally is that economic growth needs energy to fuel it, and oil is part of that. So looking at this data, what this says is that oil demand relative to GDP still has a very strong relationship, and that any growth of GDP above roughly 2% is in GDP global is going to lead to growth in demand for petroleum. So even if global GDP slows down in 2025 and 2026 relative to 2024, and that's kind of what the IMF and the World Bank and many other forecasters are suggesting. As long as it doesn't fall below 2%, we're still going to see growth in oil. So the forecasts are kind of changing from growth in the low 3% range to maybe 2.9% growth. So 0.2 or 0.3 percentage points drop is what people are saying going into next year, and that is still going to require more demand for petroleum than a lot of the doomsayers are suggesting. So that graph there probably is something that would look pretty good today, but let me tell you that that was from 2017, 2018. Up at the top, it says one of the largest forecasts for oil demand growth came from the International Energy Agency in Paris when they were still using a current policies case. Sometime in the next couple of weeks, the IEA is going to publish its 2025 Global Energy Outlook, and they will have in it a current policies case for the first time in 5 years. It's probably going to show demand for oil in 2050 in the neighborhood of 110 to 114 million barrels a day. This chart comes from IHS Market, Dan Yergin's group, former CIRA. Basically what it is a supply curve for crude oil. And what it suggests is that at an increase in demand for petroleum of somewhere between 18 to 24 million barrels a day, and that's how much you would need to replace decline plus the additional growth that is required to get you to 2050, that oil prices probably have to going to be in the range of about $75 a barrel in today's dollars. So oil currently trading roughly $60 to $65 a barrel. Actually, it's going to slow down investment in shale in the U.S., and that spare capacity that exists in OPEC is going to be a valuable thing to have again. Final slide. What could change the consensus outlook? This is like that big long paragraph that you always see, either at the beginning or the end of a lot of presentations. It says, these are forecasts, they're subject to change. Economic developments, population growth trends, innovations in things like transportation, efficiency. That reminds me too about the difference between efficiency and conservation. Lee Raymond, when he was the head of ExxonMobil some time ago, was speaking at a meeting that I was at, and I got to sit to him next to dinner. I said, Lee, you keep talking about efficiency. I hear other people talking about conservation. And I said, how do you see the difference between those two concepts? And Lee, in his kind of gravelly voice, said, efficiency is what we do that makes sense. And he said, conservation is what the government tells us to do. I've heard that quite a bit here in Pennsylvania in the last couple of days. You know, electric vehicles, I think we're still going to see electric vehicles. You know, all we need is a breakthrough in battery technology, and we're going to see that. That doesn't mean that petroleum is going to go away, because there are going to be a lot of people in the world that are still going to want gasoline, powered cars, and diesel vehicles. Utility grids need a lot of help. Again, you've heard plenty about that. I think that we're still going to see a lot of emphasis on trying to control emissions, including carbon dioxide. And that's why in Saudi Arabia, for example, they're talking about something called the circular carbon economy, which says that you can reduce, reuse, and recycle different emissions, including carbon dioxide. But to complete that picture, what you really need to think about is removal, and removal could be biological removal, things like trees, mangroves, ocean, algae, and other things, but also technical solutions like direct air capture, carbon storage, and others. And I think that it's going to be important that industry stays in that slot that says progress is going to have to take place. Even as we use more oil and natural gas, we are going to have to find ways to reduce the emissions associated with the combustion of those fuels. So this list I've been keeping for some time. The only thing that I've added to this in the last 10 years of my experience is artificial intelligence. So I didn't have that on this list 8 years ago. It might have made it 2 years ago. It's definitely on the list now. The use of artificial intelligence, I think, could, not only is it going to be energy intensive because of the electricity requirements, but I think that it is going to make a big difference in terms of things like finding solutions to carbon direct air capture with using artificial intelligence to explore different catalysts and other kinds of fuels. So I'm going to stop there, and I'm going to give back a little bit of the time that we lost with the later start.
That's okay. Is this on? Great. Does anybody have any questions for Adam? You're going to get a lot of chance to do a lot of FaceTime with him today. So, and he's been here many times. So you'll probably find him back meandering through the museum, looking at different things and contemplating the future. But anybody? Any questions? You all want a break? I guess so. Okay. Anyways, please give Adam a round of applause. Thank you, Adam. Much appreciated. Okay. So that was a very, very busy morning. What we're going to do is we're going to take a 15-minute break now, be back here at around 10:15. We are then at some point going to invert the seats, and everything is going to be with that in the background. We had to roll the dice this morning concerning the weather, and I think now we're going to be able to save your corneas. So see you back here in 15 minutes. You find food and coffee still off to the left, my left.
we think what we're going to do is talk more. Yeah, so what do we do? Just put back here. Fantastic. All right, and we've got two panels. We have this panel and this panel.
It just brings back grade school when you do that. All right, thanks everyone. We are here to start day 2 of the panel conversations. I'll be with you for the first 2 panels before handing it off to more capable moderators for our afternoon session. Again, just a quick reminder for maybe our new panelists, those that weren't here yesterday. What we're trying to do is we're aiming to be brief in our comments to allow more dialogue. We are trying to define our acronyms and just be more colloquial in our speech. As I said yesterday, key, which I know I don't need to remind all of you, but civility is key. We want strong views. We don't want ad hominem attacks. And then we're going to try to stay on time. It's great that we got back on time. I don't think we're going to get to full treatment on any of the issues in our panels today, but I do think that we can at least have a good, robust discussion in the hours we've been allotted. So again, just for those that are new today, I'm Steve Burns. I'm a local native, and I'll be, again, moderating the first 2 panels today. The first one here is on evolving energy sector trends in response to emerging technologies. My panel here represents a diverse set of government, regulatory, and utility practitioners that I think can give full treatment to the issue. We have, starting at the far end, we have Jay Lovell, who is a senior energy policy and diplomacy expert with over 15 years of experience in the U.S. Department of State. Next to Jay, we have Will Poland, who's a senior director of the United States Energy Association, where he leads a team that supports cooperative energy programs with industry, the U.S. government, and several foreign governments. Next to Will, we have Greg White, a former Michigan Public Service Commissioner and Executive Director of the National Association, or former Executive Director of the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. And then immediately next to me, we have Anthony Lamina, who's currently serving as Director of Interstate Marketing at National Fuel Gas Company, and he's been doing such since August of 2011. Correct. Okay, so with that, I think we're just going to dive right in. And so maybe, Will, I can turn to you. So as I mentioned a bit, I think yesterday, AI and data center needs are dominating the headlines, dominating conversation. And right now we have some estimates of 70% plus increases in energy demand over the coming 2-3 decades. So, Will, given your engagement with industry, given your engagement with the utility industry in particular throughout the U.S. and Europe, kind of what trends are you seeing, and how are you seeing utilities think about and perhaps address this surge or projected surge in power demand?
Yeah, thanks, Steve. And I want to thank you and Andrew for having me back. I was here at the inaugural Drake Well dialogue, and it's great to be back and to see how you've built this out. It's becoming a very well-known meeting and attracting a lot of attention. Appreciate the opportunity to come back. And also to be on a panel with my colleagues here, distinguished panelists. So yes, we heard this morning from Mike Summers about the importance of AI and how it's driving energy demand. I'm going to look at it from the electricity grid's perspective. I think we have other panelists who can look at it from what happens if you cite generation for data centers from behind the meter. But just to sort of give a kind of a reset and give a sense of what we're looking at. If you think about a typical data center size of 400 megawatts, in capacity, and you think about it running 90% load factor, which I think is low for a data center. And you think about a very modest industry rate of grid electricity at 8 cents, which I think nobody is getting 8 cents anymore, then this data center is drawing about a little over 3 terawatt hours of power, which is pretty good size. And it's running at $250 million a year in cost. And that's just one data center. If you project out what the International Energy Agency says will happen between now and 2030, that the AI demand for electricity will double, then we're looking at adding the equivalent load to the worldwide grid of the size of Japan by 2030, which is a very, very sizable amount. And, we have to think about what is the impact on can the supply chain provide this kind of, can the supply chain provide the equipment and the grid technologies needed to deliver that energy to consumers and to data centers? What are the cost implications? And how do we allocate those costs so that there is both the ability to sustain the AI demand, but equity for consumers, right? And so the thing that occurs is that it's a nonlinear acceleration of cost for the data centers, right? Because as each megawatt of demand puts pressure on the supply chain, the cost for each computing unit is disproportionate to the previous units, right? And so what we're looking at is a rapid increase in the cost of delivering and generating electricity. And when you factor that into the supply chain for transformers, for gas turbines, et cetera, we have a question of whether this is going to be sustainable or how can we do it. And I would suggest that one way to do this may be through new technologies on the transmission grid. And I think the other way, which Anthony will talk to, is to put some of this generation behind the meter.
So before I go to others, Will, could I just come back to you real quick? You talk about new technologies on the transmission system and pushing more power through existing wires. Could you maybe describe a little bit for the audience here some of what you're seeing being installed?
Yeah, I mean, there's a new emerging set of technologies that the United States is leading in called grid-enhancing technologies, right? And these are technologies that couple sensors with data and AI to be able to route power on the most optimal routes on the transmission network, and also to be able to expand the capacity of existing lines, because what they do is they monitor in real time the electricity flows on a line. And so in the past, when we didn't have the capacity to monitor and evaluate so effectively, we used seasonal norms for it. So we had a winter norm that said, we could carry this much electricity on a line, and we had a summer norm. And the summer norm is the one that we really worry about in most cases, because that's when it's hot out and the lines have to be derated. But with this new technology, we can see every second, every millisecond of the day, what the temperature, the ambient temperature is, and we can adjust what the line is carrying such that we can disregard the old-fashioned norms and bump up to a safer level the capacity. And some utilities around the country have seen that they can get another 25% of capacity out of their transmission lines by employing this technology. Now there's a question of what incentives are needed to be able to deploy this technology. And there are other technologies that we can talk about in terms of conductors. The United States is developing a whole new set of conductors where we can use the existing rights of way for transmission and get another, magnitude of capacity out of these transmission lines. And so there's a lot of opportunities here for us to do this, but it will come at a cost, and we've got to understand those costs in order to make this work for everyone.
So you hit on a lot there. And one of the things you did touch on was the supply chain issues. And so maybe I could turn to you, Jay. I know we had worked together in the past trying to get U.S. technology placed overseas. And one of the things we would run into quite a bit were supply chain constraints. So just from where you sit, some of the work you've done, maybe if you could speak to what you're seeing globally and some of the demand constraints, or supply constraints, I should say, that you're seeing in terms of this build-out that we're all talking about.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. Thanks again for having me here. So first, if you want to look at the administration's AI overarching international policy, I'd implore everyone to look at the July America's AI Action Plan that they reduced. It's about a 20-page plan, so it's actually really remarkably digestible, and it's basically on 3 tiers. And the third tier really focuses on sort of the international plan. The third portion focuses quite a bit on getting out AI semiconductors as quickly as possible, exporting the full AI stack, which is everything from the chips to the standards, as well as sort of mitigating PRC influence and making sure that there's standard and security across the AI value chain. However, what it doesn't touch a lot on is the energy infrastructure challenge that we're going to face. Steve mentioned we cooperated quite a bit over the past few years about the power generation supply chain issues. I would note that over the past few days, we've heard quite a bit about the need for gas turbine generators to power data centers domestically. When we were working on issues in Ukraine and in Europe in terms of power generation challenges they were employing the same technology that was needed that data centers are going to need domestically and internationally for this, meaning that there's a serious supply chain constraint in terms of the actual infrastructure we'll need for power generation equipment. Steve, I do want to offer one note of optimism on some of this, though, where the U.S. can play a leadership role in terms of AI energy exports, and that's on grid efficiency solutions and maintenance solutions. You're seeing, I'll just highlight one company in particular. There's a company called Tapestry. It's an AI energy efficiency and maintenance solution package where they employ AI on grid systems to improve maintenance and efficiency. And they have partnerships not only internationally with New Zealand, the UK, and Chile to improve their grids, but within PJM, actually locally, they have an agreement to use AI to improve interconnection timelines, which is a major issue for data centers locally.
So I'm not going to hold you to this, but what are you seeing in terms of length of delay in terms of supply chain when it comes to getting new generation on? Because we've talked a lot about permitting delays and other such delays, which we'll get to in a little bit, but just in terms of just raw equipment, what are you seeing?
Yeah, absolutely. If you want to, I'll use gas turbine generators and some of the higher production ones, so you're talking 50 megawatts and above. It is a 3 to 5 year purchase time minimum for those. And really there are some real strategic challenges to actually ramping that up. We can get into some tools that we know federally we can use to ramp up those timelines. But realistically, internationally, there are 3 major suppliers of those: GE Power and Vernova, Siemens Energy, and Mitsubishi. And all of them have their own internal plans to ramp up production, but you're talking years away from being able to make a meaningful impact on that.
So I think that's actually then a great segue here to Anthony, who's, I think, doing a lot of work in terms of behind-the-meter generation and so on. So would really appreciate you maybe taking us through some of the work you're doing and how you're trying to get data centers and related equipment up and running faster.
Yeah, absolutely. Steve, pleasure to be here today. Thank you very much for having me. And it has been such an exciting time in energy, and particularly watching the whole AI data center narrative play out. So, maybe going back 18 months, we started reading analyst reports about just really eye-popping numbers on the power generation needs. And I'm sure everyone in this room has seen that. Goldman Sachs a year ago, or maybe more now, maybe 18 months ago, predicting 60 gigawatts of generation needed to support AI. And, I think, there was a little bit of skepticism, 18 months ago. Is this really gonna play out? These are huge numbers. Fast forward to where we are today, and, I think we're seeing the narrative unfold, right before us, right in Western PA. So it's been super exciting. I think, from the behind the meter standpoint, across the country, we're probably looking at like 10 to 15 gigawatts of behind-the-meter generation that has been either FID'd, announced, or under construction. So again, just to reiterate, you know, it is coming to fruition. But also I just comment too, you know, within PJM and what Will was just talking about with power prices, you know, part of the opposition to data centers, you know, by the general public is, well, you know, you're going to grid connect and you're also using a ton of our land. Maybe job creation isn't all that huge, but you're also going to increase my power prices. So, you know, behind the meter, I think is a great solution. You know, for behind the meter, I think the shale plays are becoming landing pads to site behind the meter data center operations. So particularly Appalachia, obviously, we're seeing big announcements, Eastern Ohio, and then the Permian too. So Dallas, West Texas, you know, those are the areas that we're starting to see this play out. And also, those areas, you know, they have dense pipeline infrastructure to support behind-the-meter generation, and it bypasses the lengthy electric queue process. So it's a great alternative to get these facilities up and running quickly. And you know, as we were just talking though, there's delays to get the turbines that impact that, but there's, you know, I think we're seeing other opportunistic routes with these developers on how they're navigating around that. You know, there could be some bloat in the queue too for those turbines that, you know, I think there's opportunistic ways. There's mobile generation fleets that are being used. So yeah, I guess a few comments there. I'll stop there.
Okay, we'll come. Believe me, we're going to come back to you. So, but you know, maybe again, you mentioned behind-the-meter generation, right, as a way to get through some of the regulatory requirements, the interconnection requirements, and so on. You know, maybe this is a good opportunity to go over to you, Greg, and talk about some of the work you did as a state regulator and some of the requirements that new projects needed. Because, you know, again, we've heard an awful lot about the need for permitting reform, which I think is fair, right? But, you know, I always like to tease into what exactly does that mean, right? So I think it would be helpful as maybe a bit of a level set for you to talk through what certain regulatory agencies are looking at and how they are considering and approving certain projects, if that's fair.
Sure, absolutely. Thank you so much. Appreciate the opportunity to be here. I've certainly learned a lot. It's been an outstanding conversation. To be honest, we cannot do justice for these issues over these 2 days. Covered a lot of ground, but there's just so many layers of complexity. Let me start, Steve, by mentioning, first of all, I was a public utility commissioner for the state of Michigan. I also ran the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners, a 135-year-old trade association in Washington, D.C. And my members were the state public utility commissions around the country, so the Pennsylvania Public Utility Commission was a member. The primary responsibilities of a state public utility commission, we're not environmental regulators, we're not safety regulators, economics primarily, okay? So the concerns and the things that a public utility commission and commissioner are looking at is, first of all, resource adequacy. Do we have adequate resources to provide the energy needs of the consumers, so electricity, gas, et cetera? The second part of that is reliability. In other words, when you flick on that light switch, you want the lights to come on. And I don't know how many of you visited other countries where that doesn't happen, but it's pretty eye-opening when you don't have energy resources like we have. We're so blessed in this country. And then the final, incredibly important thing that a state commission has to worry about is affordability. And this is the challenge that we're hearing today. The rates are going up. Prices are going up across the board on nearly all commodities. And so this is not unique to the energy industry. However, because of this situation involving the tremendous demand that's coming on, and the fact that we already have an aging infrastructure, right? So power lines, pipelines, things like that are aging, and they're aging out. They need to be replaced. They need to be replaced and upgraded all at the same time that we need to build new generation, which then gets us over to the permitting issues. And there's no question that the permitting is a concern. One of the things that we do at a state public utility commission, and I did cite transmission lines, not interstate, but intrastate transmission lines, and gas pipelines as well, was make sure that voices are heard. In other words, we have a public process. We hold hearings. We take testimony. Parties intervene in the cases, and they come before the commission, and we'll talk about, here's the concerns that we have. And then the commission has to take all that information together. It's a record that has been built, and then the commission has to base its decisions on the record, on the merits of the case, and the application of law. And I'll make just one other kind of caveat before I go back, and that is public utility commissions and regulators, including environmental regulators, have no common law authority, all right? 100% of their authority comes from the state legislature, right? So the state legislature sets the policy. The regulators are, in fact, policy implementers. Now, there are times when legislatures will leave some of the details. In other words, trying to craft the details, write down, granular details in a law can be very challenging. And so oftentimes the legislature will say, okay, commission, we want you to hold hearings and determine some of these details through a rulemaking process. But once again, the legislature has oversight of the rulemaking process as well. Most states have regulatory oversight at the legislative level where they then review and approve any rules that come through. So it's important to understand that this isn't somebody, I didn't like my decisions to be overturned in the courts, and so it was critically important to me that my decisions be based on that record and clearly within the four corners of the statutes that authorized my work. If I tried to push the envelope and get outside of those four corners, odds are that the decision's going to be appealed and a court is going to say, you didn't have the authority to make that decision's now overturned. And that sets things back. How does that help the process if your decisions are being overturned? So critically important there. The permitting is something that we really need to get our arms around because I'll just give you kind of an example. We would have a rate case in front of our commission, and let's just say a $500 million, $500 million rate case. Going to raise rates for the electric customers maybe 5%, maybe 10%, if it's approved by the commission, right? In the hearing room, the only people in the hearing room are the utility representatives and their lawyers and the intervening parties. So the Attorney General or the consumer advocate, the staff from the commission. But I would sit there and look around the room and say there's 10 or 15 people in this room and we're talking about a $500 million rate case. If we had a siting case, so citing a gas gathering line or citing a 10-mile transmission line simply to connect a generator to a backbone transmission, there would be busloads of people, standing room only. They would be lined up outside the door, 500 people deep, and they all want to say something, right? And so you can kind of understand these are things that impact them. They impact the local. I see this transmission line. This gas line is going to come down my street. So it impacts me personally. And that's what will really drive a lot of the discussion. And that, in my view, is one of the reasons why the permitting process has become so cumbersome. And so, some of the things that we need to think about, and I know Senator Manchin, I worked very closely when I'm retired now, but when I was executive director of NARUC, I worked very closely with the senator's staff on trying to look at how can we reform this permitting. And one of the proposals was for the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission to, in fact, working through the Department of Energy, establish national corridors. In other words, find places where, in fact, we see there is a need for a high voltage transmission line, and clearly establish that need. But once that need is established, then it goes on a fast track. And you have to then, I don't want to say, you don't want to impede anybody's rights. That's not where we're going at all. But obviously there's a lot of games that can be played that will delay a lot of projects, delay them to the point where they become uneconomic. And that's what we have to try to protect against, is let's see how we can set up this process in a way to streamline it so that voices are heard, right? People get the opportunity to say their piece, but then it doesn't become an ideological or a political battlefield, and decisions can be made and things can be built.
There was so much good information there. It's almost difficult to pick where to go. But I'm going to pick one thing because maybe it's a pet issue of mine, right? You talked about the rate case, okay? And maybe, Will, I can go back to you on this, right? Because there's almost a counter incentive, I think, at times for utilities to do the appropriate upgrades to their system because they're not able to recoup the cost of those efficiency upgrades. Well, I'm looking, I know you and I have talked about this, so maybe could I just drop that big topic on you and let you take it further?
Well, I'm probably less qualified to speak about this than Greg, but I'll take a shot at it, and then I want to pivot back to the permitting reform. So, I mean, in some cases, this is pretty arcane stuff, but in some cases, the things that I spoke about, which are software and sensor upgrades, can make a big difference in terms of the transmission grid's carrying capacity, but the incentive for the utility isn't there because the utility's rates are derived from putting steel in the ground and incurring capital costs that it can recover and earn a profit on. And so if you're incurring an operating expense, essentially, that enables the grid to carry more capacity, the utility sometimes may not want to do that. They may argue that we need to build a new transmission line instead at hundreds of millions of dollars of cost so that they can earn that rate of return. It's not to villainize the utilities. It's just the incentive structure that they have in the current rate making. And I think one of the questions that I would pose to Greg, and we can come back to this, is the regulatory compact and the way we have developed our electric industry since the times of Samuel Insull, is that useful, or can it be sustained in an environment where we have this tremendously rapid growth in demand? But let me come back to a question on permitting. I think Greg is absolutely correct. It becomes a NIMBY issue. And the administration has done a lot of, and will continue to do a lot of good work in simplifying environmental impact assessments and so forth. But when it comes down to it, nobody in this room, I'll guarantee you don't want to have a transmission line in your backyard. You're not going to volunteer to have a gas line run through your neighborhood. I live in a neighborhood where an oil products pipeline runs through my neighborhood, and it's never been a problem for 30 years. But I mean, that's just unusual. And we bought into the neighborhood when it was being developed. Had they proposed this, I guarantee my homeowners association would have 100% said, don't put it here. The other thing I want to mention is that the permitting reform is one element of what delays transmission, but there's another important element to it, which is queue management. And queue management is another arcane subject. But it used to be that if you had a factory, you were a factory owner and you wanted to connect your factory to the grid and take power from the grid, you'd go to your local utility, and the local utility might get an application like this once every 10 years for a 400 megawatt facility. Now the utility is getting multiple requests for 400 megawatt facilities in a year. And it's dealing with what Greg said as a maxed out grid. It doesn't know when these facilities might be interconnecting. It doesn't know, the facilities can't sort of give a good estimate of when they'll come online because they have supply chain issues, they have financing issues. And on top of that, in many cases still, utilities are dealing with the same uncertainties on generation, especially when it comes to renewable. And so you've got a situation where utilities can't analyze very well who's going to be requesting to hook up to the grid for a load and who's going to be requesting a hookup for supply. And if you're a grid planner and you're trying to estimate the capital costs of building out your grid, this creates a real problem for you. And it causes a delay in hooking up both generation and load because you just don't know. And I think here is where Jay alluded to, where we see the promise of AI. Because, you know, as Greg said, there are resource adequacy studies, there are long-term network planning studies, and there are, you know, real-time connection studies that have to be done. And every time a parameter or a variable changes in one of them, like, for example, a data center that said it wanted to be connected now falls out, those 3 studies have to be run again. And they have to be run again and again and again each time it's done. Well, by applying AI, we can be more certain and accelerate that schedule where humans couldn't do it. We can run it in a matter of months where it might take 2 or 3 years. So I mean, we haven't really talked about the promise of AI for the energy grid, but I mean, here's a good example of that it will eventually accelerate the ability to bring projects onto the grid.
Yeah, I just had a comment, you know, with respect to like rate making. You know, you had shared some good insight on, you know, the electric side, just kind of contrasting it a bit to the gas side. You know, if you're interconnecting with an interstate pipeline, and if that power gen facility, let's say, requires a lateral, an interconnect, and maybe there's a modest mainline upgrade that has to be made. You know, generally speaking, the rates on the gas side for that interstate pipeline, it's negotiated directly with that off-taker, so it's not as much socialized across the other ratepayers.
So if I could stick with you for a second. So Will brought up an interesting point about some of the challenges of getting these big projects sited, okay? And you've noted a lot of development, right, in the general region here. Yep. So could you maybe compare and contrast a little bit, you know, what you're seeing in terms of where projects are getting developed and why, and, you know, maybe some of the advantages of those particular locations, be it the technical or be it tax base or whatnot?
Yeah, so I think it's an interesting subject, and if we kind of just, you know, I guess we'll talk like maybe within the Appalachian Basin, because that's where that's where we are today. And I think there's, you know, a different paradigm from state to state. So like Eastern Ohio, Columbus, New Albany, I mean, that has just been a hotbed for growth. And, you know, I think that region has just some natural attributes that are conducive, but, you know, I think from a regulatory standpoint, they've been really accepting, and it's the proof is in the pudding, because we're all seeing what's happening. You know, Eastern Ohio, it's flat, so that helps. It has a good digital infrastructure, good fiber, you know, backbone, so that helps too. You know, I guess Eastern Ohio has been very inviting for the last, you know, few years for these facilities. You know, one project that comes to mind is a project outside of New Albany, 400 megawatts. It's Williams, Meta, Project Socrates. You know, that project received a building permit in just 90 days. So like that, to me, that helps instill confidence. You know, having, you know, down to the local level, permitting, zoning, being able to be confident with the permitting process. So, you know, that's just a little bit on Ohio. And stop me if I'm...
Let me interject one question, if I could, did that project have behind-the-meter generation? Is that making the projects far more attractive?
Well, yeah, that project did, yeah. So, you know, that helped get it online quicker. But, you know, Western Pennsylvania and the state of Pennsylvania has a lot of similar mega projects that are in development. And I think it's super, super exciting. You know, I guess just on the Pennsylvania front, there's been great leadership from the politicians on kind of creating this, you know, ecosystem for projects, you know, like we're talking about. I can think of like Governor Shapiro's fast track program to give a concierge level service to large load facilities. you know, you could go online and you could see the facilities that are in that fast track program. So I think that's a big help. Obviously, the leadership that we saw on July 15th, certainly very welcoming. And then, you know, we're sitting right on top of the molecule here in Western PA. So for behind the meter power generation, I think it's a huge selling point. You know, we've got the pipeline infrastructure to support this development, and, you know, and we're doing it, so.
Okay, how much time do we have left? Because I want to make sure we bring the audience in like we did yesterday. And where are we at? I can't read hand signals. Just, we have 15 left? Wow, we've been talking longer than I thought. Okay, so let me then turn it out to the audience and ask if we've got any questions. Is there a roving microphone out there? I just asked if someone would be willing to be my rover. Maybe we start with you and then we go to you. We start there and then go here. Okay.
Thank you. Terrific panel. Haley Book with Shell. As a former energy and environmental regulator in Pennsylvania, I spent a lot of time working with NARUC, so thank you, Greg, and with NARUC International on a lot of mentorship programs in Bosnia-Herzegovina with energy efficiency and also in Kosovo regarding energy affordability. So that being said, at the outset, I was wondering what a Pennsylvania regulator would have to offer Kosovo in terms of knowledge exchange. Found out very quickly there are a lot of similarities with rural housing, old housing stock, et cetera, that really played a role there and helped make that connection and that exchange very valuable. So that all being said, what other states or what other countries, perhaps, can we be looking to who are grappling with these problems or already have implemented some solutions to them, perhaps, that we can learn from? Or are we now in a unique position and the rest of the world is looking to us?
Do you want to take that, Greg?
You've got some outstanding international experts on this panel, and first of all, thank you for your voluntary service. Our international program helped train regulators in developing countries and help them understand how do you build a reliable grid. And like I say, if you've ever been in some of those countries that don't have a reliable grid, it's really amazing when you see the benefits of reliable energy and what it does to those economies and the quality of life for those people. So in regard to your question, I really think that the U.S. is in a very unique situation. I really do. You know, when we would go to do these international events, I always learned more than I felt I delivered. I would come, you know, I'm going to teach these folks all about utility regulation, et cetera. I would always come out saying, well, I just learned an awful lot that I can take back home. But I think because of the U.S. energy dominance situation, the fact that we have this tremendous blessing of energy of all different types, we're in a situation to lead. Now, that's precarious because others are catching up, right? And so we have to pay attention to what China's doing. But this is a unique opportunity in my view. Again, you've got some outstanding international experts on this panel, but I think the U.S. is in a very unique opportunity to be the leader and to really push that in a way that I think would benefit not only our country, but the entire world.
So I'm going to turn it to Jay in a second, and then maybe also Will as well, just what you're seeing in terms of how other countries are accelerating infrastructure development, and whether or not in doing such there may be stepping on some democratic norms, if that's the price of how they're accelerating. But not to preface any response, but the reason I grabbed the mic is I also wanted to say thank you because I helped manage some of those programs. And the very first time I went to Serbia, the thing they said to me when I spoke to the Regulatory Commission there is they said, please send Pennsylvania back. Okay, so to all of you that have engaged, thank you so much because I'm actually trying to do some writing on this about how this sort of volunteer service from the United States overseas, post-communism, has seeded a pro-American environment around the world in the adoption of American technical standards and how that leads to advantages in the global economy today. So thank you. You're one of the linchpins of that, so please. With that, sorry, you got to follow that, Jay. So maybe Jay and Will.
Absolutely, and I'm happy to kind of cite two cases. One is a bit of a warning case, and one is, I think, is a real opportunity. A good warning case that came up quite a bit in our work was Ireland. Ireland centered itself as a data center hub for Europe and tried to retain a grid that was almost entirely powered by renewables. And they learned very quickly that that was not possible. They worked closely with hyperscalers to try to find behind-the-meter generation solutions, but ultimately, as kind of has been emphasized over the past few days, they needed gas. Renewables aren't a baseload power source, and you need gas right now to be able to power it. So I think that that is a very good case that is consistent with this administration's push for dispatchable power consistently. An opportunity case, which is less about data centers and more about potential new grid efficiency technologies and new power generation technologies, is Ukraine. Steve and I worked significantly on that, and while I think Ukraine wants to be a data center hub, right now it's focused on just stabilizing its grid. But if we are able to achieve achieve some sort of conflict resolution in Ukraine, they're going to need to rebuild their grid from the ground up. And in doing so, they're going to need grid efficiency technologies, they're going to need new grid management solutions, and they're going to need new power generation solutions. Everything from gas turbines to SMRs in the future, small modular reactors on the nuclear space. So if you want to look at a sort of a test ground for some of these technologies and solutions, I think we should keep our eye on Ukraine, and an area where the U.S. can help really lead and support in that as well.
You know, the question is, you know, are we able to learn from other experiences, or are we in a unique position? I have to say, I think we are in an extraordinarily unique and advantageous position. To me, we're in the dawn of a golden era of energy. We are so blessed with energy in this country. And if you look around, why are we not seeing the data center proliferation in other countries? We don't see it in Germany, we don't see it in Europe. We see some of it in Japan, but not that much. Korea. It's because we have the underlying gas resource that no one else has. And, you know, I think that this gives us a unique advantage. It comes with challenges, but I think, you know, if we can overcome these challenges related, and we're seeing them now, and you see them in PJM and in the other RTOs, the cost challenges, I think if we can overcome these challenges, then we truly are on the cusp of a golden era of plentiful energy for the country.
We had a question here. Wait a minute, just a second.
All right. I kind of have two questions. Good morning, my name is Catherine Norcross. I'm a junior at Oil City High School, and thank you guys for giving me your time. I appreciate it. So, are you guys ever worried about like using AI to like rely on your information? Because oftentimes it might not be like true, but mistakes happen. And if mistakes were to occur, are you guys willing to gamble on relying on AI, or would you just like shut it off from there?
I used AI to generate the questions for this panel. That's an interesting question. You know what? I'm just gonna punt. I'm gonna kick it to you. Go ahead.
Yeah, so definitely a philosophical type question there. You know, I guess, you know, what my day-to-day is around, you know, how can we figure out how to power AI? But, you know, what the algorithms do when they're running, and, you know, determining what's right, what's wrong, what information it should be outputting. I think, you know, that'll be, you know, a societal issue that, you know, we're going to have to deal with. So.
Yeah, so I'm sorry. You don't want to rely on AI in a vacuum, right? You want to have that reinforced. So I look at three areas where I see AI is already contributing tremendously to the energy industry. One is in the planning process, and improving the planning processes is another way to improve the permitting processes, right? Because the planning right now, particularly at places like PJM, is just so cumbersome that nothing gets done. The process is so cumbersome. So the AI can help cut the speed on that. But you've also got engineers and people in the room who can fact check some of that. Another one is in things like wildfire mitigation. And I know a lot of people, I've heard people say, yeah, wildfires, that's a Western US thing. It's not. If it's not already in your state, it's coming soon. Wildfires are a phenomenon that we're seeing more and more. And we're able to use AI in wildfires and in just kind of storm response recovery and storm preparation in ways that we're able to determine where are these things going to happen? What are some of the steps we can take to mitigate? And then the final is in security. And that's a double-edged sword, right? You know, the internet, et cetera, has created a lot of avenues for harm. Players, actors who are not, you know, working in our best interests can use some of those technologies. But if we use them correctly, we can use AI to enforce and improve our security. And so I really see that AI has got a tremendous opportunity going forward to improve things, but at the same time, I would not rely on it 100%. I basically fact check as you're using it. And we've got the resources, we've got the experts to be able to do that, I think, effectively.
Jay, you want to go ahead? And can we move the microphone up here for the next question?
Yeah, and if I can just make 2 points. One, to your question about are you willing to kind of have failures along the way? And I think if you look at the administration's July energy policy, which again, I'd encourage everyone to read this, it's a really digestible one. The answer is yes, they're going to move at a speed in terms of AI adoption and implementation that things will break and there will be failures along the line. And we're going to have to live and learn with some of those. But in order to achieve sort of AI dominance and to make sure that US AI infrastructure is the leader across the globe, that's a risk we're going to have to take right now. The only other thing I would say too is in terms of AI, though, it's only as good as the data you put into it. But we are seeing some real successes. And just one other success story I kind of want to highlight is in terms on seismic data and drilling and siting. ExxonMobil has already improved production significantly in terms of being able to get more oil out of the ground by using really good data. There's a geothermal company in, I think it's based in Utah, that has been able to produce significant gains in terms of well drilling out of that. But that has all relied on getting really, really good data over decades of years that they've put into it. So, you know, AI is going to move fast and break stuff, but the best way to make it better is just make sure that the data we're putting in is concrete.
You know, I think that one of the things that we don't talk about often, and we need to think about it, is cybersecurity. Cybersecurity with AI becomes an exponential risk that needs to be addressed because, you know, if we think about we're taking data off grids, we're taking data off of water systems, we're taking data off of critical infrastructure, and we're using it to make decisions about operations that affect millions and millions of people's lives on an hourly, second by second basis. We see China probing our critical infrastructure constantly, and with AI, it has the potential to do even further damage if we're not careful.
Hi, thank you, Steve. Thank you, everyone. I'm Sam Breen. I'm Venango County Commissioner and longtime participant in the Drake Forum. I thank you all for being here in beautiful Venango County. And forgive me, but my interests are for Venango County, very Venango County specific. And also as a Penn State fan, I hate it when I hear about Ohio eating our lunch. So Anthony, this question's mainly directed at you, but anyone can jump in on it. And that's how do we, in Venango County, but also Western Pennsylvania as a whole, but specifically Venango County, position ourselves to, we've heard a lot about regulation and that in general, but at a local level, at a local regulatory level, all the way up through the state, for our legislators, what specifically can we do to fast track these projects, make ourselves competitive with Ohio, and see these things, this infrastructure being built here in Western Pennsylvania.
You know, I think geography matters oftentimes, and you know, I think that the geography here in Western Pennsylvania, you know, is set up for success. We're set up for the win. You know, I think you know, I'm not a developer. You know, we're the pipeline. But what I can tell you is I've heard, you know, about the tax abatement programs that Ohio has. I've heard a bit about, you know, data center development zones that have been helpful. So things like that. You know, could be policies to look at too to help bring this interest to the area. You know, I could tell you from a natural gas perspective, you know, Venango County, we have a pipeline that runs right through Venango County. We could support behind the meter generation in this area. You know, with immediately available pipeline capacity and through modest upgrades, you know, we could look to potentially support larger scale generation. I don't know, does that help give some insight?
That helps a lot. Yeah, that does help. I think we know at a local level what we can do with permitting and stuff, but it's a little more lost on me how we navigate the state level. And I've been to the facility and the pipeline here and appreciate that. And just knowing that, I know, you know, a lot of it depends. We don't have a Homer City, you know, situation, which honestly nowhere really does. That's just ideal. But if we have, you know, 9 out of 10 of the parts that it takes to make us a good location, then we can focus on the one part we don't have.
Yeah, I think just to that point, it's identifying, because geography wins. You know, the site, it's going to win at the site level. So identifying sites that check those boxes. You know, does it have access to, you know, a fiber backbone? What's the gas pipeline capacity like? Does it have electric transmission? You know, it might not be able to get a grid interconnect immediately, but there could be line of sight to one in the future, and behind the meter projects, you know, want that. Water, sewer, you know, all the gauntlet of criteria is really intense.
Could I? And this thought just came into my mind, so it's dangerous and it's probably going to be woefully uninformed. But in terms of siting, okay, though the infrastructure has since been removed, there's a lot of heavy industry that has moved out of this region. I can speak to Titusville right here, SciTemp, the old steel plant, right? So there are at least still those rights of way, right, that are in place. Is that in any way helpful?
Yeah, I think the brownfield sites, you know, you mentioned Homer City, you know, there's other brownfield industrial assets like that throughout Western Pennsylvania. I can't recall offhand about Venango County, but
I can give you a list.
yeah, we could look at that list too. Happy to do that. But starting with, because the brownfield sites have those intangibles. A lot of time they have the grid interconnect, and that it's been idled, obviously, because the facility is not up and running. So the physical interconnect could be there, and then you just got to do the paper interconnect to get the facility back online. So that's a great place to start.
Thank you.
So let's do one last question. I know we're running short on time, so we're going to do one last question, then I'll turn it to you all for any closing remarks, and then we'll conclude.
Thank you, Stephen. And thank you, each one of you, for your time today and your collective experiences to share with us. Appreciate you. My name is Justin Mason. I'm with the Conservative Energy Network, Pennsylvania. I'm actually a bit of influence of Andrew's long-term work as he led tours here 30 years ago for elementary students, and I was one of those elementary school students. So supporting elementary school tours and getting students involved is vital in the energy future of this state and nation. Beyond that, dovetailing off Sam's question, I deal with authorities having jurisdiction, local authorities having jurisdiction, because in Pennsylvania, it's all local. If you want to cite a project, you need local buy-in. What can be done to create more opportunity, as you've seen in other places, that would encourage local buy-in for these authorities having jurisdiction, because you can't cite anything in Pennsylvania energy-wise without township supervisors and county commissioners having a very clear understanding of intention and final product. Thank you.
I don't know if you want to start. It's
Yeah,
a tough one. We're not Pennsylvania legal experts, but we can, I think, speak in generalities. Go ahead.
Yeah, so just some thoughts on that. You know, I think it has been a little while since, like, you know, a gas plant was cited in the Commonwealth. Just thinking of Western PA, boy, like, you know, Tenaska's Westmoreland plant comes to mind. I think that was probably the last one, gigawatt facility. 2016, 2017, 2018, that time frame. But to your question, anyways, you know, I think you know, we're talking about AI, data centers, power gen, and we touched on this earlier in the panel. But those facilities, and I think Jay, you brought it up. They can be dispatchable into the grid too. They can be used for peak shaving. So, you know, it could help. It's not. The residential electric user isn't having to incur a higher rate oftentimes, you know, on these behind the meter projects. So, you know, I guess with respect to data centers, you know, there's a stigma that, oh, well, this facility is going to come here. Maybe it'll create, you know, some jobs, but our power bills are going to go up, and that's not often the case. So just a little bit more education, I think, on these projects could go a long way.
Maybe, Greg, could I ask you to weigh in last? And Greg, you've got a history of public discourse and public hearings and so on. So if there's any maybe insight you have in terms of bringing local officials on board.
Well, you know, first of all, there's a lot of competition out there, and so you need to make sure that people know that Venango County is open for business, and that we, you know, that you have support in place. If there's questions, you know, if they need to understand what are the permits I need, you know, here's who you go to, here's how to talk, here's how we can work through that. I work a little bit more at the state level, obviously, and I see a lot of competition between the states. And I see the states that say, well, we're not going to get involved in, let's say, the AI boom. They do that at their own risk, right? And they oftentimes will decide, you know, hey, we made a mistake. We should have been up front on this. So really getting out front, but making the economic case, I think, is critical. You can make the economic case, you know, and then present that to the industries and say, you know, look, we have this natural advantage to our region, and, you know, here are the different things that we can provide in our region, but make the economic case on, you know, and present it so that I think that's what's going to really decide those cases, right? And at the end of the day, the investments are going to go where there's opportunities and where the economics work.
Yeah, the economic impact of these projects is very sizable, between direct, indirect job creation, you know, everything that goes along with it. I think there's tons of benefits.
Package together the educational opportunities, the different things that, you know, that you have as a region, the university structures, things that can help bring, make it an attractive region for these kinds of projects.
Okay, I'd love to keep this going, but I think we're already a bit over time, so I'll give everyone 30 seconds at the end if you've got a last message you want to relay.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Stephen. Thank you, everyone, for the fantastic questions and the back and forth on this. I think it's abundantly clear that for this administration, the biggest priority, the biggest public-private priority over the next 4 years is going to be establishing AI dominance domestically and internationally. And I just want to note that I've been incredibly impressed and pleased today to see that Pennsylvania's position in the energy dominance portion of that is front and center of what you guys are pushing forward. Natural gas and renewables, Pennsylvania is clearly at the front end of this, and I just want to laud all of Pennsylvania, and in particular Homer City, for their development. It's really been impressive over the past few days.
You know, I just take away that we're in a new era of an optimistic energy sector. We've got the resources, and all what we have to do is just find the regulatory formulas to be able to enable the infrastructure to be built and get out of our own way.
And I'll play off of Will's comment there. As these industries evolve, regulation needs to evolve too, and that's critically important. A lot of the regulations under utility regulation were established 100 years ago. The principles of regulation were established 100 years ago. The industries have changed. It used to be strictly vertically integrated. One company owns the generation, transmission, distribution. That model doesn't exist, and it's being challenged even more today by these innovative technologies and opportunities. So as the industries evolve, so too regulation needs to evolve.
Yeah, I echo the comments of my panelists here, but you know, from the national fuel gas perspective, you know, we have been, you know, I personally have been really trying to sell the Appalachian Basin, particularly Western Pennsylvania, to data center operators, hyperscalers, and you know, that's been a prime focus. It's going to continue to be a focus, and looking forward to seeing more projects come to fruition within the state.
Okay, so with that, I think I've made a deal with Will and Greg that I've stopped listing our total experience because it just makes us all feel too old. But you have a wealth of experience here on the panel. I think you all, I want to thank you all personally for taking time out of your schedules to come join us. And could you all join me in a round of applause?
Great. Just a very quick turn here to the next panel. So quick bathroom break only, and come back here maximum 5 minutes, okay? Please take your seats, everyone. We need to resume.
It's on.
Yes, of course. That's why we're doing this. Yeah.
But if you could gray out Landon in the picture, we're just blurring his
Please take your seats, everyone. This includes elected officials, county, state, and otherwise, and think tankers.
All right, I think that was a tough panel to follow, but I think we got a good crew here for the next one. And so for this, we've titled this panel, Can the U.S. Have It All? Energy Dominance in a Transitioning World. So we brought together this group of experts here to discuss, if and how the United States can restore and maintain its energy dominance in a world attempting to undergo an energy transition. So we're going to discuss whether pursuing an all of the above resource policy is optimal and what we would need to do to achieve that. And to the extent that we have time, we're going to delve into supply chain concerns, trade-offs, et cetera. So I want to dive right in since we're a bit behind schedule. So starting next to me, I have, and I'm going to get I always get your last name. It's Kevin Dairatna, and he's the director of the Center for Data Analysis and the chief statistician for the Heritage Foundation. Across from me here, we have Stephanie Pronko, is a senior international trade specialist at the Nuclear Energy Institute. Next to her, Landa Durrence is the vice president of energy and infrastructure and the senior director and Morningstar chair for global energy security at the Atlantic Council Global Energy Center. Wow, that was a mouthful.
Dick is very adamant that I have the chair on there, though.
Okay, you've got to shorten your intro. Okay, man. All right, and then Kevin Book is the managing director of research at Clearview Energy Partners, where he covers energy geopolitics and fossil energy policy. So as I like to do with all the panels, I like to start with a nice general question just to kick us off. So, Landon, your portfolio has been global for years now. So maybe could you speak to what new energy sector frontiers and development trends you're seeing? Kind of what is energy dominance? Is the United States well positioned to either achieve or maintain it?
Well, it's great to be back here at the Drake Dialogue. For those that know me, I've been a little bit mum lately, so I do have a little bit of a voice issue, but excited to be here and thrilled to be on part of this panel and thinking about the macro issues around energy dominance, around energy transition, and I think it'll be a fruitful discussion. Maybe I can start by just talking about how I think energy dominance is being defined in Washington, D.C. right now, as we have a National Energy Dominance Council that the President stood up. And I think it really runs around two variables. It has to do with affordability, particularly in the domestic context, and exports and our ability to take abundance and share that with the globe, especially in times of crisis. So in terms of affordability and the domestic narrative, I think, Henry Hub prices for natural gas at $3, looking at a world in which we've gone from 20 years ago being a net importer, a peak of net imports of oil of 12 million barrels a day, producing now about 150 times as much conventional oil as we did back then. And being a net exporter. Same story on gas. 2016, 0 LNG exports. Today we're getting close to 15 BCFD, 150 billion cubic meters annually, different metrics, but a lot of gas. I think maybe around 2015 we were consuming as a nation somewhere around 650, 700, and so we're talking about 150 now, and moving up to, by 2030, 300 billion cubic meters of gas exports in LNG. That is abundance. It's abundance domestically. It reflects the fact that prices are low. The President's very adamant about affordability. That's been a feature of the discussions. So I think on the conventional energy side, we're unequivocally in a moment of abundance or energy dominance. And I think you can see that being impactful on the international stage as well. When you have Russia, invade Ukraine and watch Europe shift away from 40% reliance on Russian natural gas, backfilled predominantly by U.S. supply, that is energy dominance being projected. I think just one caveat on this, though, and Mike Summers mentioned 30 to 40% increase in energy demand over a much longer horizon. I will say, a lot of that isn't just conventional energy. That'll grow as well, but it's a lot of electrification. I do think that there's a conversation we need to have about the temporal element of energy dominance. We are dominant today. How do we make sure we're dominant in a decade? Because I think you need to have a little foresight as we discuss, and hopefully we can get into it as we have this conversation.
So I think that is again, and I don't ask them to do this. They make such great segues for me. You can flip from speaker to speaker. And to go back to the last panel a little bit, you talk about energy dominance in the future. I know I talked with Will quite a bit about grid enhancing technologies and the U.S. market share there, and as we get to electrification, and how we can project that forward as well. But maybe Kevin, I can go to you because that speaks to energy transition as well and how the world's energy use is evolving. I think we had a question in Mike's keynote about energy transition and are we actually seeing an energy transition and so on. And from my perspective as an electric power guy, I think of that as how the grid is operated as less opposed to, say, fuel sources. But I don't know, Kevin, I would appreciate your perspective. Like, are we in a transitioning world or how are you seeing, if we are, that transition play out?
Thanks, Stephen. It's good to be here. This is my first time, second time at the museum, and it's great to see you all. So Mike Summers did very, I think, adequately describe the nature of energy transition as it stands today. It is not a question of substitution, but supplementation. New clean resources are supplements to the existing supply stack for the most part. And we're not yet at a point of substitution. But I'm going to give you two other transitions to think about, because I think that we are very much in at least one of the two, and I think the second one maybe also. The first one is a transition from scarcity to adequacy. I didn't use the word abundance. Perhaps abundance is appropriate at different times. I think adequacy is a more cautious term. But if you look at the United States, for decades, until the middle of the last decade, we were in a period of very significant scarcity. So talking about 25% or more on a net import basis going to our total supply. Today, we're on a net export basis, 10% of our total supply is going out every year. That's a dramatic and an incredible change. And it's had an interesting impact. For one, our policies were configured for supply scarcity and for demand surges. The demand surges came before the supply scarcity. And most of the last several decades were all about trying to come up with alternatives, ways to extend the mix, biofuels going into the liquid supply, a lot of ways to try to address that. We are now in a different place, and that different place has enabled a lot of commercial opportunity, a lot of energy security opportunity. 8 out of the 10 barrels over the 15 years through 2024 that were added to global supply came from United States liquids production. So that's a pretty significant contribution to global energy security. So a transition from scarcity to adequacy, but I would suggest maybe back to scarcity. We are now looking at a different kind of scarcity, not upstream supply scarcity, but midstream connectivity scarcity. We have enough molecules, but we can't move them from supply sources to demand centers. I think we'll talk about that. Let me give you a second transition to add to the first two, or the first one I gave you and the one Mike gave us. And that is a transition in our thinking about energy. Over the last 3 decades, this year will be the 30th Conference of Parties to the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change. So for more than 3 decades, we have been pricing in externalities. We've been talking about thinking about energy in terms of environmental consequences that we want to count in the price or in the cost of energy. Roughly 15 to 25% of governments at any given time are doing that. That isn't necessarily bad or good. I'm not taking a value judgment. Clearview doesn't. But I would suggest that we are also on the cusp of thinking about a different kind of externality. Environmental consequences are negative externalities, costs that economists say, you got to put it in the numbers because it's not being counted and it's bad. What about the things that aren't in the numbers that aren't being counted that are good? We've heard about this several times today, the positive externalities that could come from being able to organize demand, expand society, accelerate innovation. thanks to AI. Suddenly, we're looking at energy not just as a net negative, oh wow, how do we minimize our consumption to manage the environmental consequence, but as a catalyst for all kinds of growth, including in the efficiency of our energy system. So a new kind of externality, a shift from scarcity to adequacy and maybe back to scarcity, and yes, supplementation in addition, not substitution.
So maybe Kevin, I can turn to you. I know you've done a lot of work in this space. Would you be able to maybe speak to us about some of that work and kind of your perspective on government intervention, regulation of greenhouse gases that's come up and so on, and how that might apply to some of the conversation here?
Absolutely. So firstly, thank you, Stephen, for moderating this panel, and thank you, Andrew, for putting this wonderful conference together. Yeah, so at the Heritage Foundation Center for Data Analysis, we really take a deep data-driven look at many of these questions. So I actually have some slides. I was told that this was not intended to be a talk, but rather a conversation, and it will be a conversation, but I have some nice data visuals that I think will really shed light on many of the questions we've not only been asking at this panel, but throughout this conference as well. So let's see if this clicker works. Can we do the next slide? Perfect. So we did a statistical analysis of energy, of the link between access to affordable and reliable energy and human flourishing. And these are just some snippets of this analysis here. This paper is co-authored with my colleagues Diana Furchcott-Roth, Miles Pollard, and Richard Stern, and is available on the Heritage Foundation website. And here you see a chart. This is a cross-country analysis. Each dot is a country. And you can see on the x-axis you have per capita energy consumption, and the y-axis, you have per capita GDP. And it's not surprising. Countries that consume more energy on a per capita basis are wealthier. And this is the thing here. Lawmakers, particularly many in Washington, D.C., fortunately not from what we've heard today at this conference, often take energy for granted. When you flip on a light switch, you run a conference, you do many of the things on a day-to-day basis. Many people don't realize the beauty that goes on behind the scenes, and we need access to affordable and reliable energy to do many of the things we do, and ultimately they are manifested in terms of what economists refer to as gross domestic product, but in the final manifestation that many of us see is in terms of income and our quality of life. Now, that is just on the income side, but we were actually talking about the externalities, the positive externalities and the negative externalities, and I can go on about this for hours, but let's see here. Next slide. Okay, well, I can talk about this a little bit. I didn't know this was in here, but this is fine.
Doesn't seem topically relevant, but go ahead.
Sure, okay. This is fine. So countries that consume more energy on a per capita basis can do many things, many things, including produce more agriculture. And here you can see that countries that consume more energy on a per capita basis have greater agricultural yield. And the reason is because Westernized countries, well-developed countries, have moved away from decades ago when human beings were doing a lot of the manual labor, and then now they can rely on machines, technology, and advanced techniques for machine learning to actually engage in a lot of this production. Next slide. This is a slide that I was looking for in terms of externalities here. So there is a link not only in terms of economic output, but in terms of public health. So we got 4 plots here. Again, each dot is a country. And the x-axis on all 4 plots is per capita energy consumption. And the first plot on the upper left is the number of doctors per 1,000 people. The second plot on the upper right is life expectancy. The 2 lower plots are child mortality and maternal mortality. And you can see access to energy enables doctors to get trained. It enables them to do their jobs. It enables them to help you and everybody else live longer, empower them literally with life-saving treatments. And as a result, also, you see lower child mortality rates, I should say, and maternal mortality rates as a result of what doctors can do. Now, next slide. In terms of the externalities here, and this to me is actually some of the most interesting aspects of this analysis here. Here we have 2 plots, deaths due to dirty air and deaths due to dirty water. And we often hear from people that from both sides of the aisle, we want clean air, we want clean water, and we want a healthy environment. Well, countries that consume more energy on a per capita basis do better on both metrics. And the reason is simple. You have tools to clean the air. You have safer equipment, say with kitchen ovens, for example. You have tools to sanitize water, and as a result, mortality, as a result of both of those, plummet. So the bottom line is access to affordable and reliable energy is paramount to a flourishing society. So then the question is, okay, here in the States, what can we do? Well, we had somebody from the Institute for Energy Research present here yesterday. Every couple of years, they issue their North American energy inventory, which quantifies the amount of oil, gas, and coal here in North America, separately in Mexico, the United States, and in Canada. So if you see the next slide, here is a plot from the Institute for Energy Research's study, and you could see that here in the States, we have over 1.6 trillion barrels of oil and over 4 quadrillion cubic feet of natural gas. We ain't running out anytime soon, I can tell you that. So here's a great question. What would happen if we could actually leverage these resources? Because what we've heard from lawmakers over the years is we need to constrict access to these resources, firstly, because they are finite. And I guess, yes, it depends on what you mean by finite. But secondly, the concern is that they are going to exacerbate climate change. Well, you can look at the next slide right here, and you could see that family income, and this is using, Adam Semensky was presenting earlier today, the Energy Information Agency's National Energy Modeling System. And here you could see the economic impact of their high oil and gas scenario, which involves a scenario of 50% more oil and gas than their business as usual case, injected, no pun intended, into the American economy. And you could see that as a result of more energy abundance, Americans are wealthier. Over a 25-year time horizon, you see over $300,000 of increased income for a family of 4. And the bottom line is the cost of electricity, cost of energy go down due to the higher supply, costs of hiring go down, more jobs, and everybody prospers. Now, Stephen had a question about greenhouse gas regulation. And again, one of the reasons that people seek to curb the use of fossil fuels is in the name of climate change. Now, the question is, okay, so we often hear lawmakers talk about reductions in climate change in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. Well, it's worthwhile to go a step further and quantify the actual temperature impact. So I can just say this, that at the Heritage Foundation Center for Data Analysis, we have an IPCC, Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change model, the model for the assessment of greenhouse gas-induced climate change. MAGIC with 2 C's. And if you were to simulate completely eliminating CO2 emissions in the United States right now, what would be the temperature impact, not the greenhouse gas impact, the temperature impact, because the former sounds large. What is the latter? Next slide. Oh, we don't have it here. Okay, that's fine. I could tell you anyway. Even assuming worst case scenarios by the IPCC, there would be less than 0.23 degrees Celsius temperature mitigation by the end of the century. Slim to none. And that is worst case scenarios about the climate warming. Now, what about the state of Pennsylvania right here? Well, I've run the numbers here for the state of Pennsylvania. In 2050, if this state were to stop using fossil fuels completely, there would be less than 0.004 degrees Celsius temperature mitigation by 2050 and less than 0.0081 degrees Celsius temperature mitigation by 2100. Slim to none. You wouldn't even be able to see it on a thermometer. Now, this is from a paper by my colleagues Diana Furchtgott-Roth and my former colleague Alex Fry, who's now at the Department of Labor, where they simulated the concept of, or the concern there is, of New York banning fracking. You could see here these counties on the Twin Tiers here, and above fracking was banned post-2010, and below fracking was banned, fracking was not banned, fracking continued. And the question is, this lends itself to a nice experimental design. That is, what would happen if New York were to actually allow for fracking? Well, the next slide, you could see that right here. And as a result of allowing for fracking along the Twin Tiers, you could see that Pennsylvania, the green line, had significantly higher income growth, over $74,000. New York dwindled to $50,000. But if it allowed fracking using the regression analysis my colleagues had put together, they would actually have significantly higher income. So bottom line is energy everywhere, including Pennsylvania, your neighboring state of New York, is fundamentally important for human flourishing, and this really shows you why.
I want to come back to this graph in a bit, but Stephanie's been very patient waiting, and I wanna go to her because we've been talking about all of the above energy. All right, we've been talking about the need to extract resources or use U.S. resources. We've talked about supply chain issues and so on. I actually joked a little bit yesterday before you arrived, right, when SMRs came up and said, oh, SMRs have been 5 to 10 years off for 15 years now. So just would appreciate kind of your perspective on where you see nuclear playing a role kind of in the energy build out, both domestically and how we would be looking to move it overseas and kind of the U.S. positioning there and if and when you see it making an impact in what it is we're talking about.
Yeah, well, given where I sit, I don't think it's shocking that I'll say I see nuclear playing a huge role, both domestically and internationally. And I think that just gets to what we spoke about earlier, is just that no one could have predicted that this increased demand that's coming. And between data centers, manufacturing, electrification, you need power that's always on. You need reliability, and that's what nuclear is. It's clean and it's reliable, and I think that's why it appeals to both sides of the aisle, and I think we're seeing just tremendous support and tremendous momentum between the executive orders that are really making a push for nuclear build-out, as well as these tech companies that are investing billions of dollars in nuclear projects. Of course, yes, people have been saying this is coming for a long time, but I do think that we're at an inflection point now, and things are changing. People are starting to put dollars behind these projects. They're not just projects on paper, but they're real projects, they're real customers, there's shovels in the ground. Of course, it's not going to be a solution tomorrow, but that's why we have oil and gas. I would not say that nuclear is going to be a substitute. I think oil and gas will continue to carry. Renewables, of course, maybe will also be in complement with nuclear, and I think that gets to the all of the above approach. I think if we are really talking about energy dominance, you need to leverage every tool in your toolbox, nuclear included. And just to give kind of an example, Duke, a major utility, just announced their 2025 energy strategy, and they said that they're going to significantly increase nuclear and gas. Why? Because they want to have options. And I think when we're looking internationally, I think Russia's invasion of Ukraine has really heightened the need for this. People want nuclear power because it really enhances energy security. The fuel is on site. You can go a long time without refueling, and they can own and operate it themselves, and that's something that they really want. And past that, they really want to partner with the U.S. They don't trust partners like Russia and China anymore, and we can't export our technologies if we don't build at home. And so I think it's all interconnected, and I think just all of these factors are aligning for the future of nuclear to be really bright.
Could I just follow up on that a little bit? Do you see the future of nuclear being more the smaller, more modular reactors, or do you see a return to, say, like the Westinghouse AP1000, the larger centralized plant type model? And do we even have the workforce here in the United States at this point? Because it dissipated through the 80s and 90s, so kind of those trends.
Yeah, no, I think it's going to depend on where you're talking about. So at first we heard after Vogtle came online, everyone was kind of looking at SMRs because they just didn't need that much energy. And now we're thinking, okay, well, if they're going to build X number of SMRs, then maybe it just makes more sense to build large. And maybe that means multiple utilities or multiple companies, multiple off-takers going in on a large plant together. But I think when you look internationally, I think a lot of these smaller countries with smaller grids are looking at SMRs because it's all that they can support, or maybe they just don't have the land for it. And so I do think that it's going to be a mix, and also some of these SMRs that are coming to market serve different purposes. So down in Texas, Dow Chemical is looking to SMRs to decarbonize the chemical industry, and so I think there's just different uses for the different technologies that are coming to market. So I do think that you're going to see both.
So maybe, Kevin, could I come back to you then? Given the direction that we see, and it came up a bit again, I think in Mike's comments about swings in regulatory policy from one administration to the next, or just general approach. As we look to necessary development here in the United States of the power sector, we just appreciate, your opinion on how those swings might be delaying, or maybe in some cases enhancing, kind of what the net impact is on the build out that we need to see here in the United States, and does that make us maybe less competitive overseas if we follow through what Mike was saying in terms of the uncertainty?
So we heard this morning Adam, and more recently Kevin, linking the relationship between GDP and energy. It's a pretty strong relationship. I think another relationship you shouldn't overlook is stability and prosperity. And let me say this before I get into that. Doing less with less is austerity. Doing more with less is efficiency. And confusing austerity for efficiency is somewhere between complacency and insanity. We're going to need more energy. And I think we need to think about that very practically. How do we get it? We get it by providing investors with stable returns on invested capital. How do we enable that? Well, policy stability would be a good starting point. Unfortunately, we find ourselves in an interesting time. Mike also used the metaphor of a pendulum. It's not a pendulum if it swings all the way around or it catapults off and leaves the clock entirely. And we're looking at greater amplitude. We're also seeing new dimensions of policy flux that are unhelpful for an investment perspective. And one of them that we know well is that regulatory policy has been swinging back and forth. But if you go downstream from regulatory policy, we're seeing permit stability evaporating, which means that it's very difficult to make reliable investments and expect them. Pipelines that are approved are suddenly no longer approved. Hard to invest in that capacity. Same with renewable energy facilities. And then if we go upstream from the regulatory level, we're seeing policy flux at the legislative level. A lot of investors think, well, you know, it would be great if we could just get through all this regulatory nonsense. At least we've got the laws we can count on. But if those laws are changing, then we're going to start to get in the way of some of those returns. I think that what would be really helpful would be to depoliticize energy just a little bit. Some statistics. If we look at the top 10 fossil energy producing states, it's true that 8 out of 10 of them were states that voted on a popular basis for Trump in 2024. 2 did not, Colorado and New Mexico, and very significant fossil energy producers. The rocks don't vote, and neither, to quote the Blue Oyster Cult, do the wind or the sun and the rain. It's the people above them who do. And if you actually broaden the aegis to include nuclear in that primary energy numbers, those 10 states were 90% of fossil energy. The 10 states that are 80% of total energy include 3 blue states, the third being Illinois. And so you have a diversity of political opinions. It might be time to stop thinking maybe in terms of the politics of energy, being for or against fossil fuels, for or against. You should be for BTUs at lower cost, greater volume, to the maximum extent possible, as clean as possible.
Okay, I want whoever's recording this to just transcribe that. I want to put so much of that as like needlepoint or something above my doors. That's just great. Landon, you were nodding. Did you have something you wanted to add there? I've tried to be sensitive to your voice a little bit.
No, I'm happy to jump in. Look, I think if you're going to talk about depoliticizing energy, you also have to think about what is politicizing energy. And I think that we've created an ecosystem in the last 20 years that is making this polarized aspect of policymaking in Washington, D.C. a feature, not an intermittent aspect of policymaking. And you know, for me, I think that there's a lot to say. Kevin talked about, you know, climate change and those elements. The reality is we are creating very powerful lobbies on both sides because renewable energy, nuclear energy, fossil energy can all be economic in different pathways. And you can regulate to favor one or give subsidies to favor one in a manner that I think is you know, very polarizing in Washington, D.C. A part of why that happened in 2009 is something that the Trump administration just took down, which was the endangerment finding and this idea that there's a whole judicial architecture, not just a legislative architecture, that can be punitive against fossil energy through the greenhouse gas protocol and for the conversations around how people are dealing with emissions. And I think we also need to talk about depolarizing emissions and fuel. This is really a demand side issue. And the longer we make policy that is punitive towards a fuel source or punitive towards a consumer culture, I think the stronger incentive we have for people to fight back, because there is a profit to be made and a desire to have energy, access, abundance, whatever you want to call it. And so I want to say, like, we have to go back to the causal element of why we have this polarization to begin with. And for me, part of that is the ecosystem we've created on the climate front.
Yeah, well, no, I was just going to add, I completely agree with what Landon said. I think one of the best approaches is that we should allow all forms of energy to compete on a level playing field without subsidies for any forms of energy. and then the best ones will win. Because in certain areas, renewables can actually be more viable than others. For example, Southern California, Hawaii for solar power, Washington State for hydropower, for example, right? And in certain northern European countries, for example, wind power is actually much more dominant. But nuclear power, as Stephanie was alluding to. So what we really need is a market that does not have subsidies or credits or anything that really favors or props up one form of energy over another, and then the best ones will win. And I think when you have subsidies, what happens is you have manifestations of special interests that are coming from the lobbyists that end up crowding out investment in other forms of energy that could actually help with us achieving energy abundance.
Yeah, I don't want to turn into economic theory and externalities and market failure and so on. I'm looking at the panel in case you all want to say anything, but if not, I want to turn it to the did you want to say one
Just one
last thing?
contextual thing. So
Yeah.
Landon talked
Yeah,
about the polarization
Yeah.
issue, and if you go back to 2008, there were two candidates running for president who were supportive of offshore drilling and also climate change mitigation, maybe not in the same order. And here we are.
Yeah, Bush in 2005 puts through CAFE standards on vehicles. We have environmental policy in Republican circles 20 years ago, and now we're deviating. And so it's not just enough to talk about subsidies in a market. It's enough to talk about like the core cause of why you're seeing polarization and creating lobbies and really political band-aids, which are the tariff regimes or the sponsorship we have for different energy sources, because we have a perversion in how we're trying to create those markets in the first place.
Okay, again, we have great expertise up here, and as much as I would love to just keep talking to them all afternoon, they're really more here for you. So if I could turn it out, I think Andrew's got a microphone. Sit.
Thank you all. Kevin Book, I believe you said that it would be good if we could depoliticize energy. I certainly agree with that wholeheartedly. And so my question is, how do we do that?
Well, so Landon, I think, started talking a little bit about the mechanism of how we got there. How do we go back from that? One of the ways is to understand the linkage that the other Kevin on the panel was talking so much about, which are the end user benefits of energy. We actually don't produce energy so we can create energy jobs. It turns out that the labor intensity of upstream production in the United States has fallen by about 50% over the last 15 years. But the number of jobs until recently had gone up quite a lot. The reason was that we produced a lot more energy, even at lower labor intensity, greater efficiency. And the end user benefits of that, the result that we had in price stability globally, as well as the availability of raw materials for our industrial production and the jobs that we created in other sectors, those derivative effects are quite significant. Now, connecting the dots is hard. A lot of people sort of fell asleep when I said the first sentence, and they've been asleep ever since. It's a tough topic to open up, but it's the you in the BTU that matters the most. It's the end user. Our energy policy in the United States is about empowering people to do things with energy, not for energy. And the more that we can connect the dots, the more we can get a sense that this is a benefit for everyone.
Yeah, no, I was just going to add that in terms of energy and the economic growth, there's actually, almost two mini stories in this. Firstly, like when you think about fracking itself, there are job opportunities with the extraction for the companies themselves, but then locally, hotels, motels, laundromats, restaurants get business. But ultimately, because we inject, no pun intended, more energy supply into the American economy, everything is better for everybody in terms of lower cost of energy, costs of hiring go down, and greater income for everybody.
Sid, there's a pretty robust political discussion in Washington, D.C. right now around carbon accounting, and not to be overly nuanced here, but when you think about emissions and pushing through Scope 1 emissions throughout the value chain, so created emissions from combustion of energy or energy use, and those move through the value chain, what you find is that emissions are ubiquitous with that GDP growth and that opportunity space. And so I think that we have to have a more honest conversation about, we can talk about emissions and we can talk about an all of the above energy strategy and really separate those. And the longer we're polarized on the emissions dialogue, I think the longer we lead to polarization within the political context. I use, as I'm talking to the White House right now, and a nod to our Saudi colleagues that made the trip from the kingdom here to the Drake Well, I use the Saudi Aramco sustainability report as a benchmark in terms of global change. Because if there's any one country in the world that has an interest in perpetuating the life of fossil energy, it's the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia. And right now, despite the policies that are happening in Washington, Saudi Arabia is planning, Aramco is planning on a net zero 2050 landscape. And so that to me is a signal that the global trajectory of dialogue has not deviated despite Washington's dialogue. And frankly, Washington's dialogue is schizophrenic because it changes between parties. And so I think, for me, to be an honest answer on this, and as a proponent of oil and gas and the abundance and the opportunity that creates for America, I really want us to be more ambitious about addressing the other side of the conversation because it's still a very live debate globally.
Okay, do we have an?
Okay, hi.
You're next. Go ahead. You, and then after you, just pass the microphone back.
So given everything that's been said, I'll ask kind of a two-part question. One, are we in an energy emergency? And if, it doesn't matter what your answer is, but what does that open for the next Democratic administration to use that method to push policies?
At the highest level, which I think is where we want to treat this topic, we've moved from an era of rules to an age of power. And whatever you call power, whether you say it's emergency powers or some other kind of power, people generally seem to be wanting their government to be as responsive as, say, Amazon. They want answers faster. They can get packages overnight. Why does it take 10 years to get a permit? And why does it take 5 years to get an answer or 2 years to get a bill? Why can't anyone pass a budget? So I think that whether or not you think it's good, and there are a lot of people with opinions, again, my job is not to have opinions, just to analyze them, you can see that a lot of power has been concentrated in the executive. It would be game theoretically and politically unrealistic to expect a differently minded future administration not to take advantage of those powers given the opportunity.
Okay, just wanted to see if anyone else wanted to touch that. I appreciate your bravery taking that one on. Could we go back here?
Hi, my name is Azaria Gregory. I'm an 11th grade student at Oil City High School. And I just wanted to ask, do you believe our world is going to become even more like survival of the fittest than it already is? Well, I feel personally that it already is, and I know how supply and demand works. I know that prices go up, prices go down. And I was just wondering, with the possibilities of running out of these resources, we might be in the clear, but what about our future generations, our children, our grandchildren? What if we do run out of these resources for energy? And just, do we believe that the world will come more to the rich are going to survive more than the poor?
I'm going to use your question and give the panel time to think about their response, but I'm going to use your question to jump off with something I wanted to ask Stephanie, or I wanted to take to Stephanie. So I've heard a lot over the past couple days, and Kevin sort of alluded to it as well, about we need purely a free market approach, said more, I think politically yesterday, is get the government out of energy, okay? And I would take some issue with that myself, okay? I am fully supportive of the said free market approach, but I believe the government should be stepping in where there's market failure. For instance, nuclear, okay? You are not going to get a new nuclear facility underwritten, right, under current economic standards, right? So you need public support to push forward new technologies. That's just one example of where you might need certain government engagement. So I just, Stephanie, I'm putting words in your mouth by saying that, but I would just kind of appreciate, your perspective on, what support nuclear would need going forward, right? And then after that, we'll get to a more direct answer to your question from the rest of the panel.
Yeah, we need a lot of support on all fronts, but I think we're feeling good about where things are now because this administration is very supportive of nuclear for multiple different reasons. And I think what NEI is doing right now is taking these executive orders, which really were to support nuclear and to push us forward and figuring out, okay, but in practice, how do we do that? We do need support from you guys, but they also need guidance from industry on how they can help. And so I think it's going to be government and industry working together in lockstep to get these technologies deployed at home. Of course, some of that is going to be funding for these advanced reactor demonstration projects, building out our fuel supply, but also looking in the international space. If we want to compete globally, then we need a lot of support over there in terms of getting 123 agreements in place. You mentioned Saudi Arabia. That would be a huge market for us if that was in place. And so we need a lot of government support, but together with industry. And so I take the point about, not having it be political, but I think there is a difference between, government support and politicizing energy. So I take both sides.
Can I direct the...
Please, yeah.
So on the young lady's question, and I think that really two things come to mind for me. One is national security as a primary driver, and the second is innovation. Let me take them in both in that order. We talk a lot about the energy trilemma. We talk about the need for secure, reliable, affordable energy. And so it has a security element, an economic element, and a sustainability element often in that trilemma. I think I agree with a growing body of research that points really that national security is the principal driver in those three. There is a big brother within that dialogue. And so I do think the friction you're feeling is a testament to the fact that energy is not just economic opportunity, it's also often power and influence. And so you'll continue to see that for as long as all the nations are running and we're not in absolute anarchy. That's just a feature. The second part, and Kevin, jumping on this, is innovation. And so I think Stephanie has technology, and I think there's an abundance of innovation in the nuclear field. There's future energies and fusion. There's also the material science side. So as you have a conversation with us, I'm surprised we haven't spent time on the critical minerals and China's pure dominance over that value chain. That we're also innovating new technologies and magnets and other elements of our global system, our economic system, that are inspired by those bottlenecks. And so I think we learned a lot from COVID-19 and the shutdown, the pandemic, because we've realized how fragile some of these supply chains are, and it's allowing us to have a really new, innovative period of time that I think matches potentially the last crisis that we saw in the 1970s.
Just to add to that, other countries that look at us and they're kind of envious of how things look for us. The oceans help a lot in buffering our security risks, but over history of the United States, we've benefited over and over again, even when we've stumbled, from natural resource wealth and productivity of labor gains. And now the two are connected in what looks like it could be a moment of great opportunity. And in terms of the security parameters that Landon was discussing, I mean, I think that we do project influence into the world with our energy exports. It's a non-trivial contribution to global stability. And it's one that I think, even if you were coming in for energy transition, as the Biden administration was, thinking practically about events in Eastern Europe, and for that matter, events in the Middle East, required a pragmatic turn. And so the transition that we're still talking about, which is still happening, I think we established that from the very outset, becoming more pragmatic and outcomes focused and less prescriptive, looking at what we're trying to achieve and how we get there rather than trying to define the path that we take, is probably more useful. But as we do that, there's a lot of people will say energy security depends on diversification. The most fundamental energy security is the stuff under your feet. And so trading globally priced hydrocarbons, where you have variable cost risks you don't necessarily control, for globally sourced transition metals and minerals, where you have fixed cost risks you don't control, may not be an absolute benefit. So I think what you're seeing from this administration, and to some extent from the last one, is a pragmatism, where they're saying, wow, we've got all that gas Kevin mentioned, 4,000 trillion cubic feet of natural gas. What an immense resource. Why would we not be using that? And why would we not be using that for our friends?
Yeah. I'd like to follow up to both questions, actually. First, I'll respond to your question. So I've talked to people, I've been in this space for about 12 years, so I've talked to people over the years about this, and the bottom line is you don't know how much there is until you actually start drilling, and every time we have estimated how much oil and gas we have, it's actually undershot what the subsequent estimate has been, and it keeps going up. Now, that's not going to keep going up forever, but the bottom line is that there is a vast supply that is definitely going to be available for us in the foreseeable future and beyond that. Now, again, in the long run, though, technology is evolving, and then, yes, in terms of all these other forms of energy, including renewables, I think that there is significant opportunity for the market to evolve and these things to be more, these forms of energy to be more feasible for all of us, including nuclear technology. I'd like to respond briefly regarding subsidies for nuclear. So it's not my area of research, but my colleague Jack Spencer has just published a book, The Nuclear Revolution, where he argues in the book against subsidies and instead fundamentally reforming the regulatory apparatus there to make nuclear power more feasible. That would be like a whole nother talk in itself, but I think there are policy ideas out there to really get nuclear off the ground and unleash it.
So could I address...
Andrew has a question, I think.
Well, let me say my one bit, and then we'll go to the question. So, one point I think we need to keep in mind as well is we're doing an awful lot of conversation about the correlation, right, between energy and GDP. Okay, GDP is not uniformly distributed, right, across the population. Right, so one of the things, because we're supposed to have a local flavor to this event, I think that would be useful to address, especially to the young lady's question, right, is as we speak to this energy abundance in the United States right now and how further extraction and trade is going to lead to more GDP, is that GDP going to be realized in the energy producing regions by the local population as opposed to said corporations that are extracting the resource? Right, and I'm not going bleeding hard on you right now, but just to throw that out there, it's more like how can local communities better benefit from these resources we have? And I know this isn't necessarily all of your policy expertise, but I've got the microphone, so I'm asking. So let me throw it out to you all.
We saw the study that I presented earlier.
But what I'm saying is that GDP isn't uniformly distributed across the population, right?
Well, there's obviously
yeah,
distribution
okay.
in terms of income throughout any population.
So Pennsylvania's got its own regulatory apparatus, which includes an impact fee to take some of the proceeds from production and give them to the people who are in the areas where the production is taking place, which is different from a more typical redistributive mechanism of a severance tax, which generally applies it to the state's spending. That more localized approach has been given plaudits and criticism, but I think it tries to get at some of what you're looking at. More broadly, though, the producing states, if you ask, do the Democrats who are the ascendant power in New Mexico love hydrocarbons? The answer is I don't think most of them do. They love the benefits that hydrocarbons bring to their local economy. Roads and schools, they are not necessarily fighting for the industry. They don't necessarily love the industry, but they do recognize the economic benefit and they work practically, and they think, well, this is something that we want more of, or at least we want to maximize the benefits for local opportunities. So there are distributional consequences to ownership, and you have a highly concentrated wealth result from the investment in capital into the oil and gas sector. That has led to a lot of populist criticism of the oil and gas industry since its very beginning, right? So Oil Can Harry, if you go back to the Looney Tunes cartoons, I think it was Looney Tunes, is not a sympathetic figure. If you look at him sort of menacing Pearl Pureheart in the old cartoons, doesn't look like it's a good thing. That popular perception is not new, but it overlooks that there are distributional reallocation benefits for the population. People who own stock in their oil companies indirectly, without realizing it as part of their mutual funds and retirement funds, are also benefiting. So some of those questions about distributional consequences and benefits are very, very real, particularly when you talk about environmental justice communities who are bearing the consequences of industrial activity in any industry. But there are a lot of efforts that have been undertaken deliberately by governments and policies, and then there are others that just happen by consequence of ownership and equity stakes.
Yeah, if I could just add on some of the community benefits of nuclear and what we've seen with nuclear projects that are happening right now. Nuclear does support, because when you think about it, it's an 80-year relationship at least. So it's not just the construction, but it's the operation, the maintenance. And so DOE has quoted, I think, 470,000 jobs supported, and nuclear is one of the highest paying energy subsectors. And so a lot of these communities are seeing that, and they actually want it. So to take the TerraPower project in Wyoming, for example, we hear a lot of times with energy, not in my backyard, not in my backyard, but we're actually hearing the opposite for the TerraPower project in multiple communities. wanted to be the ones to host this project because they realized the benefits that it would bring to the community, and now they're looking to have more projects. So obviously they only picked one town, but others want that because they understood once they saw it kind of in action how that actually could directly benefit the people that live there.
I cut a gentleman off, I'm sorry, so we'll go back there first.
My name is Mark Pearson. I'll be talking this afternoon. I'd like to address the lady's question. You are so blessed. Why? Because in coal and natural gas, the world has somewhere between 200 and 300 years worth of supply. In oil, it's only 52 years. But when I was your age, it was 28 years. So when I was at high school and a junior in the late 70s, actually mid-70s, but I like to think of it as the mid-late 70s or 80s, the world was using 60 million barrels a day of oil, and there was only 28 years of supply left. We were going to be out of oil in the year 2000 or thereabouts. Today we use 104 million barrels a day of oil on a global basis, and we have 52 years of supply. More than likely, because as the panelists have told us, because of technology, because of, as we heard in the last panel, maybe oil needs to go up to $75 instead of $60. Maybe it'll be 100 years. It's not 500 years, but it's not 25 years or 30 years as it was when I was your age. So we have a lot of resource to turn into a reserve that we can then use. And so it's not an issue that we're running out this decade, next decade, or whatever. There is, decades to centuries of hydrocarbon available.
Okay, we had, let's go here, and then I think we're running out of time, if that's fair. We're going to go here, then here. Oh, okay, so we're going to go here. You can ask 2 questions then,
Oh,
and then...
excellent. Okay, no, I won't abuse my privileges. Thank you again for all of your insights. I think the conversation about how do you depoliticize any issue is worthwhile, given where we sit today, and energy is an especially interesting case. One thing that we're noticing, at least the trends in Pennsylvania and in other quote-unquote swing states, where there is some energy production, is just the rising cost of electricity is now on voters' minds. People are talking about this is going to drive the governor's race in New Jersey, for instance. And that seems to have an equalizing effect on what people want in terms of energy policy. And so I'm noticing this, that when you poll people and you contrast things like energy affordability with maybe, investments in more carbon emission reduction or other types of, subsidies, if you will, or changes in policy, people just want affordable energy. And that does seem to have a depoliticizing effect. So I wonder if any of you could speak to, if you're seeing any of those trends in your own work in different places, maybe outside of Pennsylvania, but when affordability becomes an issue, everything else becomes secondary.
So I'm going to talk at the beginning again to give the panelists time to collect their thoughts. I really wish if Greg was still in the room, I'd put him on the spot and throw it out to him as a former state regulator. Because when we talk about rising costs of energy, if you go to your electric power bill, only about half of it is actually the wholesale cost of energy, right? The other half, the retail rate that we're all paying, are various adders that the voters or the state legislature have approved, okay? And like in Virginia, I think I'm paying 15, 16 cents right now. The vast majority of that is for coal site cleanup, pre-funding for an offshore wind farm, for other cleanup projects around the state that get added, consumer use tax, all these little adders that get put on the bill. So I'm not saying that that's the driver of the rise, but what I'm saying is when we think about energy costs, we do need to also be sensitive to the difference between the wholesale rate that's coming from the generation sources versus the retail rate, or these adders that get put onto all of the respective bills that we're paying. Okay, that was just my miniature soapbox moment, right, to give the panelists time. Please let me pass on to them.
So I have a paper actually on the Heritage Foundation website with my colleagues Mario Loyola as well as my former colleague Andrew Weiss, where we looked at residential electricity prices in all 50 states, and what we noticed is that they are higher overwhelmingly well, I shouldn't say overwhelmingly, in general they are higher in states that have renewables mandates. because what's happening is the state is artificially inducing demand for certain forms of energy that aren't that I wouldn't say necessarily have zero demand, but that demand is not there, and that has manifestations and consequences in terms of prices.
So I actually spoke to that exact issue. I do a podcast, a video cast, with my colleague at Center for Strategic and International Studies every 2 weeks, head of the program there, Joseph Mikett, and energy program there. And we looked at that, and we raised a question. We didn't answer the question. Why is this? And it can be for a lot of reasons that you see those renewables mandates correlating with higher rates, residential retail rates. One of them could be that the rates were already high and they looked at renewables as an alternative because they were looking to come up with another source of power. Another could be that actually there's other factors at work, industrial composition, regulated market status, that kind of thing. So you do want to be careful, but the correlation is pronounced. One thing I would say, though, is that we're having the affordability conversation and we're having the access conversation now, and less about the sustainability conversation, and we should reflect on why that is. I think a lot of people will say, well, it's because it's being deprioritized and people don't care anymore. That's a very negative way of looking at it. I would give you a positive aspect to it, which is if you look at the history of environmental regulation in the United States, we've overcome an immense amount of pollution and improved the cleanliness of our performance. If you look at the safety and reliability of our energy sector, we essentially count on it without having to think about it. That's extraordinary and wonderful. And now that we're finally at a point where we're able to focus on rates in a time of demand growth, and we're saying, wow, these are really expensive, we have to figure this out, that is our first concern, and that it can be our binding concern, as Mike Summers said it would be, is actually part of the success of our environmental technology gains and performance in response to both market and regulatory signals.
There's a third related energy transition we haven't talked about today, which is over the last half century, we've gone from 2% electrification to 20% electrification plus. And I think, yes, we can talk about the wholesale cost of energy and how low they can be at times. We're not spending enough time speaking about the energy system costs of being able to introduce energies, and also the bottlenecks we've created, what Kevin started with in terms of actually permitting projects and building. I really need to see us move to a build-first culture. It took us 4 years to build the Golden Gate Bridge, 5 years to build the Hoover Dam, and we're spending a significant amount of time building much less challenging projects that we just can't get realized right now, that are also now beginning to weigh on those energy prices. And I think having been in multiple administrations and having been in the Trump White House the first time on the National Security Council, I've seen gasoline prices, I've seen fuel prices for cars be a real big political driver. Power prices, because of that injection scale of electrification across the economy, are now becoming something very similar. So anticipate this being a thematic element for the next decade.
Okay, so we're on the same page. I'm getting the cut signal in the back.
One last comment.
Oh, please.
I came to, having grown up in Williamsport, Pennsylvania, for the high school and college students here, Penn State is a wonderful, unbelievable university. And you can study almost anything that you want to study there. And it could be economics, it could be statistics. Penn State has in Williamsport something called the Pennsylvania College of Technology. I was just there last weekend for a high school reunion. The two biggest majors at Pennsylvania College of Technology are welding. And so this is a 4-year school, so you're going to learn lots of things, but you can learn welding and you can learn electronics and electrical work. Those are the two biggest majors. So the graduates in the welding and electrical parts of PCT are earning more in their first jobs than the faculty. True story. So if you want to read a lot, be curious, find something that you think looks interesting, and then go learn about it. And if you really want to, if you think that this industry is something that you like to be involved in, you can become a welder and do really, and life would be good. And it was said a number of times here, don't be pessimistic about what the future looks like given everything that happens with resources and that kind of thing. markets, prices, and technology work together, and generally speaking, we are on a path towards better living conditions, not worse. And I basically think that that's going to continue, and you can be part of that in many different ways.
Okay, I think that's a great way to end. Normally I give the panelists like 30 seconds at the end, but I think we're so short on time that we're just going to cut here. Could you all give me a round of applause for the group here?
Fantastic panel. So we're going to adjourn to lunch. One quick word, though, actually two quick words, very, very quick, because I know you're all hungry. This is Tatiana Anderson. She is our Secretary-Treasurer of the Drake Energy Security Forum and our social media guru. Take it away.
And I'm grabbing the mic for 30 seconds. Thank you so much to all of you for participating. Part of participation is amplifying this great convening outside of these walls. So we ask that you follow us on social media. We would love to follow you back. You can find us at the Drake Forum on X, Drake Forum on LinkedIn, Forum Drake on Instagram. We have lady interns back here who are helping with social. Can you raise your hands? If you don't remember those addresses or need assistance, please ask them. We would love to follow you back. And thanks to all of you who have participated in our mini interviews. We hope to talk to you more as the day goes on. Thank you, Andrew.
Fantastic. And the last word is, every year we take a historical image, often from the archive here at Drake Well. This one, as you see, Energy for America, is as relevant as it ever was. This was produced by API in 1959 for the 100th anniversary of oil. You've seen it over here on a foam board. We produce them as posters every year. We've given them to Friends of Drake Well out in the gift shop. They're for sale for $10 each. I would highly encourage you to get them and spread them around. They also have a lot of other wonderful things out there. But first, get some food, and then go buy some stuff, and we'll see you back here after lunch. Thanks very much.